Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you all. I'm Leah. And yeah, like Steve said, I work with the Quivira Coalition. Something I didn't put in the bio is I've been farming for a long time. And I work on a farm. I co-manage a farm. It's a cooperative agricultural enterprise. It's called Vacancy Farm. And we are based up in Cuesta. And so Quivira Coalition is in Ogapoge. That's the Tewan name for Santa Fe. And that is the ancestral and traditional homelands of many different tribes and peoples. And Vacancy Farm is located in Cuesta, New Mexico, and that is Ute, Apache, Comanche, and Pueblo land up where I live. And I really appreciated, Kat, that you brought in the land acknowledgements, and it's so much connected to all that we're talking about. So I'm talking to you about collaborative agroforestry and silvopasture initiatives. I'm going to hide this bar because Donna taught us how to do that. And I'll say we've talked a lot about systems change and paradigm shifts, and the word paradigm reshift came in there, thanks to Jim. And I definitely love thinking in that way. And I tend to think about it sort of on a social level. So as you heard from Steve, my master's research was on racism. And so I'm often thinking about how social systems actually impact agriculture, not just people, but also the environment. And so I want to sort of set the scene, and I had too much fun making this slideshow, so forgive me, but I wanted to set the scene of the ecosystem that I entered when I came to New Mexico. And let's see if this works. Okay, so first there's sort of the roots. There's the history that Kat spoke so eloquently to of Indigenous history of agroforestry and silvopasture as embedded within traditional ecological knowledge and diversities of practices that were very much arose out of the different cultures and the different climates that people found themselves in. So that's sort of the deep ongoing, relationships that Indigenous people still have with the land that was highly affected by colonization, and continues to be. So colonization, as you all know, brought so much racism, including land theft, and as well as genocide, as well as pollution, land degradation. And so not only, are there the sort of obvious impacts of, industry that we have, and that's, creating the climate change situation that sort of seems to be like such a reinforcing feedback loop that we seem to be in. But also we have some of these impacts that can seem more invisible, but they're very real for a lot of people, and a lot of people of color, which is the land theft. And then also with the land theft is appropriation of knowledge. And then, what gets lost there is that there's still all of this knowledge held by Indigenous people and a lot of leadership to be turned to Indigenous communities and BIPOC communities in general. So we have lots of different groups that are working in agroforestry. I mean, this room alone has so many people working at it from so many different angles. And so, some of those groups are Indigenous led, some not. It's just a diverse landscape right now of who's focusing on it and the ways in which they're focusing on it. And then here I came. I didn't actually come on a plane, but I thought that was a better image. With my own background. So, I grew up with a father. I grew up part of my youngest years in Niger in West Africa. And my dad was part of the Regreening the Sahel project. He's a soil scientist with a deep passion for working with farmers. And I don't know how much you all know about that, but it was a fairly successful project that brought a lot of trees back to a very aridifying region that was losing a lot of topsoil. And it had benefits for a ton of farmers. These, goats and other livestock were able to graze and eat off the trees, and they were able to use the trees for fuel. And it even increased cloud cover. I mean, that's like crazy, right? Like enough trees to change the weather, like that's cool. And so I had that, and then the farming background, and then going to grad school and meeting and working with agroforestry producers. in lots of different ways. And then my own sort of learning about racism that is ongoing and, you know, just constant. And so here I enter the scene and there's a lot going on. And so I have to say, because I have such an interest in agroforestry, the first thing I did when I got here was Google who's doing agroforestry around here. And that's how I found myself with SWAAN, because they're the people who come up. So once and so then I work with the Quivira Coalition. See, I make little symbols to remind myself to say things. I work with the Quivira Coalition. We support land stewardship in the Intermountain West. And so we work with lots of ranchers, but also farmers, landowners, anyone who stewards land. And, you know, we support regenerative land stewardship through things like maybe like erosion control, like the methods that Kat was talking about. And a lot of the things that we promote and teach are at their root Indigenous practices. So it all kind of circles back to that deep history. And then, like I said, I work on a farm. So once I started connecting with SWAAN, we brainstormed around what we wanted to do together. And we realized what we mostly wanted to do was hear from people in the Southwest about their views on silvopasture and have some presentations to kind of jog people's imaginations and conversation around it. So we had a couple speakers. We had Hugh Fitzsimmons, the late Hugh Fitzsimmons, and his son came and spoke about Shape Ranch, and they have a bison, mesquite, silvopasture operation. And then Maurice Robinette up at Lazy R in Washington came and spoke about their timber cattle operation. And then we basically had discussion groups. And we were gathering a lot of data from this and trying to understand what is the scene of silvopasture in the Southwest. And the group was amazing. Working with SWAAN is so fun. And some of the things that we learned in this was that there's just not, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir on some of these. There's not a lot of research out here in the Southwest on agroforestry and silvopasture. So people really wanted that, and they still want that. And I feel like the more we talk about it, that some grad student is just going to be like, yes, this is me. I want to do this. And already we have grad students like, when Kat Thompson was a grad student writing her thesis on Indigenous histories of land stewardship, which is a great paper and I highly recommend it. But in general, there's not a lot of folks doing on the ground research on the words agroforestry and silvopasture and the associated practices. So always more to be done. And then this has come up like a few different spots in this day. One of the biggest concerns we heard again and again from a lot of the attendees, a lot of whom were ranchers, is that water is a huge concern. So even though I'm a tree person, I feel like they're probably all tree people, there's a lot of trees that have a really bad rep. And a lot of landscapes that like where, if you look out in places where I live in northern New Mexico, or you go visit a ranch, people will look out over a scene of say juniper and pinon. And the thing that people will say is that it's degraded, that it should be grasses, and that it, you know, due to a lack of prescribed burning and a lack of grazing, the trees have grown in. And I think in some places that is true. Like Rich, you said, sometimes it's not appropriate. But I think it's trying to figure out where is it appropriate and where is it not. And the research is going to help us know which trees in which landscapes, you know, do best, because ranchers are very concerned about water as a resource and having enough for their grass so that they have enough for their livestock. And then another piece that I feel like Rich, you really hammered on is the words agroforestry and silvopasture. There are a lot of people in New Mexico, for example, that do these things, but they do not call them agroforestry and silvopasture. So they're new words for old practices, which Kat also hammered on. And so it makes it hard to find people to light the beacon, as we say, as I say, I guess. And, you know, because, for example, grazing livestock under pecans is a thing that people do in New Mexico. But it's hard to first find the folks that are doing that. And second, like they're not necessarily calling it silvopasture. A lot of people graze in the forests in New Mexico. I bet that happens here in Utah too. And a lot of the forest is being used for cultural resources or riparian buffers, or things that we might consider silvopastoral uses, but also they're not calling it silvopasture. It's just what people do. So I think that coming together like this, the more we talk about it, the more we sort of use the word like a beacon as a way to bring people together and get excited about this thing that they might already be doing. And then another piece of this, oh yeah, a lot of people were excited about it at these listening sessions because of the potential economically and environmentally. And it's particularly in the Southwest, people were excited about the environmental potential, about the carbon sequestration that was possible, about ways we could use some of the products for like biochar creation, wind buffers, things that just make sense in an arid environment that deals with a lot of wind and a lot of fire. And then, yeah, pecan silvopasture, if you know anyone doing that in the Southwest, please call me because I've been like trying to track you down and I can't find you. They mention you on Google, but then they don't say who you are. So, and then, yeah, just that like, I don't know about SWAAN and how you all feel, but I felt like that was a really good seed we planted and it got a lot of conversations going. And I just really feel like we got to keep talking to each other so we can keep learning from each other and figuring out who's out there and bringing them into this conversation. So after that, then I worked with SWAAN as well as a number of other key partners to apply for a grant from the National Agroforestry Center. And so our partners are Taos Pueblo Division of Natural Resources, Trees, Water, and People, who's up in Fort Collins, SWAAN, us, and then Northern Arizona University, Jim. And then we have some amazing consultants like Victoria Tencio, Kat Thompson, who you saw, and Jeremiah Pinto, who are helping guide the project. And what the project is focused on is highlighting Indigenous agroforestry that's happening in the Southwest and creating resources, outreach materials that are focused on supporting other Indigenous groups in conducting agroforestry, but they'll also be made available to the public. So they'll be supportive of anyone who's interested in learning about these practices. And so actually, next week, there's a group of us going and starting the first site visits with our case study participants. So it's underway right now and the filming will start this summer. And I'll let Rich take a picture of that before I move forward. So some of the things we're doing in this project is, so we're doing videos. So next week we're not shooting film, but we're sort of prepping for the film and starting our interviews. And the case study participants are Santa Ana Nursery. So we thought it would be really interesting to highlight a group who is actually on the nursery side of things supporting agroforestry projects. And then Jemez has a budding agroforestry project, Jemez Pueblo, Santa Ana Pueblo. And then Flowering Tree, who Kat talked a lot about, and Roxanne Swensel and her group of collaborators are doing amazing things at Santa Clara Pueblo. So we're doing videos and then also information sheets kind of highlighting some of their practices as well as the stories that they feel are important, which are emerging as we do the work. And then there's also going to be a synthesis and literature review of Southwest agroforestry and silvopasture with a focus on Indigenous projects. And that will be, so all of this is happening this year and then also into next year. And then SWAAN's going to help us with running the webinars that highlight some of these projects that we're learning about and working with. So I'm a big fan of collaboration. I find everything better. I mean, it moves slower, but it's always better. I really do think. And here are some of the things that I'm learning in these different collaborations in agroforestry. One big one is, I feel like we all know this, there's just so much knowledge already out there. And this is like why we come together and sort of shout on top of mountains about these things, is because it brings more folks in and then we get to learn from people who are doing things on the ground. And maybe they're not calling it agroforestry, or maybe they're, they have an amazing garden that they've been running and they want to do agroforestry and they already have a lot of knowledge they can bring to the agroforestry conversation. There's a lot happening here. I moved to the Southwest because I wanted to learn from people who live in a place that has a lot of challenges and know how to grow in a place like this. And you all have proved me right that this is a good place to learn about agriculture. So the more we talk about it, the more we create community, we inspire the research and education we need. I feel like I kind of hammered on that already. There are a lot of complexities. So I came in with some assumptions when I flew in on that theoretical airplane. I assumed that everyone would love trees like I love trees. And I work with a lot of ranchers who are regenerative ranchers, and a lot of them are pretty suspicious of trees. And, you know, for good reason. When you're really trying to manage your resources really well, it can feel threatening, and sometimes it can sometimes threaten your water supply. So it is complex, and I tend to lean on the assumption that the people who steward their land know their land best. And, you know, we can be in practice together, we can be in learning together, but it is complex and it is not prescriptive. And we all have a lot to learn. And so, yeah, people want examples so they can make the best choices that they can make. And we're hoping with the current project we're working on that I talked about, highlighting these Indigenous-led agroforestry projects, to put some really good examples out in the world. And, you know, by doing so, people can learn and make choices for themselves. And it is hard to make a big choice on the land, even to plant some trees, because you just don't know what's going to happen. So the more we can bring people in who have some experience with that, the more we can learn. Also, another learning, it's absolutely key to learn from Indigenous leaders and give credit where credit is due. This is connected to my master's thesis that, you know, one of the huge effects of colonization is the obscuring and appropriating of Indigenous knowledge, either ignoring it entirely or stealing it. And by really giving credit where credit is due, we can refocus resources and refocus attention on all the good work that's happening, you know, in Indigenous communities, and moving resources in that direction, you know, and leveraging my privilege, our privileges to move resources in that direction. The learning never stops. There's, you know, there's so much I'm always learning. I mean, part of collaboration that, you know, sometimes can be maddening is just that it can be slow, that sometimes you get your assumptions challenged and you have to take a minute and you have to maybe get out of the way sometimes, and listen to people. And one thing I've been learning too is about data sovereignty. And, you know, as I develop partnerships with Indigenous peoples, as Indigenous communities, a lot of them have had data mined out of their communities and not sort of fed back into their communities. So how do I not, you know, reenact that in my own work here? And so it's constant and sometimes uncomfortable, but really also exciting because it's a paradigm shift, it's a paradigm reshift, you know? So yeah, patience, listening, and responding to what people actually say. That's an interesting one too, because you write your grant, right? You write your grant, you got your proposal, you have your deliverables, and then you're like, oh shoot, this is actually what needs to happen now. It wasn't what needed to happen 9 months ago, but it's what needs to happen now. And so I feel like really lucky because Rich and Kate at NAC have been really accommodating as we've made shifts and changes based on what's actually happening. And that's not always easy in the grant world. So it's a complexity that's in the mix. Nonprofit folks, and any of you probably know that bind. So yeah, I mean, that's about all I have. And the beacon remains, little Lord of the Rings reference there. But I just feel like the more we talk, the more we'll find each other and we can nerd out together, but also, you know, like implement. I know that adoption is such a goal, and like, let's keep talking so we can adopt and implement. That's all I got. So it's kind of short, but thanks. And I could take questions. Q&A.
Oh, that's
Oh, we've seen this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gotta ask for one.
Yeah, Donna?
I forgot what you said before, but you sort of said agroforestry is not prescriptive. It's inherent. Like go to the NRCS office or to the forestry, there's always the script.
Right.
So I wonder how we can really add to that.
Yeah, and for folks online, the question is, I mentioned that agroforestry is not prescriptive, but so much of the materials that are created are sort of a script and end up being prescriptive. So how, so I'll build on that. What you're.
How can we as technical service providers seek the input so that we can help not be prescriptive?
Yeah.
How do we learn this?
Yeah, how can TSPs seek input so that we're not being prescriptive? And yeah, I'm not a TSP, so I can't speak exactly to that, but
I mean, like any of us, you know, we're
Technicals.
yeah, totally.
technical.
So, well, it makes me think of a saying, or someone just told me this thing that stuck with me was, as soon as you write a best practices document, it's already like the past. It's historical. It's, you know, it codifies something that was true at that exact moment and it no longer is because things are always changing. And I've written best practices documents. So like it happens. But I don't know if I have a very practical thing to say about this, but I do feel like there's something in the space of emergence that is like, we're increasingly understanding as a collective that, you know, we have to exist in this space of emergence because things are always changing. And if we're looking for that change rather than trying to assign what we think is true, we're probably going to find something more fluid that fits what people need. But then on a practical level, when I work with land stewards, I always just think of them as the expert of their land, like literally. So that helps me avoid being prescriptive because I don't assume that I know things about their land and their experience. I might have ideas, but I'm not gonna go in guns a-blazing because, you know, they're gonna have their own experience that I'm gonna learn from. So I tend to like try to be in the student role when I'm on land with people. Those are my thoughts, but maybe, I don't know, crowdsource. What do other people think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question in the chat. You might need to pull up the chat because I know we're using the Q&A, but sometimes things get in the chat too.
I see it. Yeah, Denise said, definition of insanity is repeating the same thing, expecting a different result. History always repeats itself. Even if civilizations degrade land and starve, economy collapse. Why do you think that keeps happening? Wow, Denise, you are bringing the big guns. That's a great question. Why do I think, I don't know if I have a good answer for that, other than I'd like to think that small changes, one-on-one relationships can help avoid the same collapse over and over again.
The basic answer is pride and arrogance.
Pride and arrogance, we hear from Will. Yeah.
Well, I
People
see
all
it right
throughout
there.
time will talk about, you know, the Romans look back at the Greeks and said, yeah, but that won't happen here because we're modern. We know all these things.
Yeah.
And that's the factor of pride and arrogance. And we are doing the same thing in
Yeah.
a lot of ways. What this organization represents is moving away from pride and arrogance.
Yeah.
That's what's attractive to me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so we brought up that pride and arrogance, you know, we keep getting focused on that, but we're moving away from it slowly, which makes me think of what Kat brought up about reciprocity. You know, there's a reciprocity between plants, there's reciprocity between people. And actually, when we resist colonization and ongoing colonization, my belief is that's how we actually get out of these patterns. Because like if you read, for example, the characteristics of white supremacy culture, I don't know if any of you have read that document, but there's a lot about, you know, hyper productivity and, you know, dog eat dog world and competitiveness and things that are the waters we swim in. But, you know, through these acts of reciprocity and through resisting these greater oppressive systems, I do believe we're moving towards something that actually has a chance. And that's sort of where my, you know, following the leadership of Indigenous leaders and other BIPOC leaders feels really important to me.
Leah, I haven't interacted a lot with Quivira, but I'm a great admirer. I've tried to do some things with the carbon grant.
Oh, good.
And so does Quivira have a conference coming up this year? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I certainly can. Yes.
Softball.
So, thank you. So the question is about Quivira, where I work, and our conference. So we have a conference every year in November, and it's called the Regenerate Conference. We're going to be in Denver this year, which is, I know, wild if you've been to our Albuquerque conference. And we're focusing on restorative economies this year. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation around things like reciprocity, but also, is the carbon credit system working, and things like what does it mean to own land cooperatively, or what does a regenerative label do? Conversations like that are going to be really interesting, and I highly recommend going, and hope to see you there.
And ranchers really come to things like this?
They do. Yeah. We also have like really practical workshops leading up to it that are like technical and things like that. That reels them in, and then, and then we have, bring the rest of it. Yeah.
So just a couple of thoughts and a question, but regarding the statement of your generation is going to change this pattern, I really don't like statements like that. No offense to Denise, but I think all our generations right now need to be changing the pattern, and it shouldn't fall on a new generation's shoulders. And as far as the cycle that she's referring to, what climate change psychology research is showing is that community level initiatives are where the best hope is to be found, and also the greatest amount of bang for your buck as far as contributing to resilience with climate change. And so important to do individual work and systems level work, but the real change in shifting these patterns is going to happen at the community level. At least that's what I'm seeing in research. And so my question actually is not to do with that, but it's about what your statement with data mining versus data sovereignty with Indigenous groups. And I'm deep in work right now with the Navajo Nation and climate change doing a project, and it's on my mind a lot as well. And I'm just curious what that looks like to you, because you mentioned you're creating a lit review and movies, etc. So how are you giving that nod back to adhere to that? Yeah.
So there's a question and there was a preamble. The preamble focused on, from your name, I'm forgetting. Roz McCann, was about how every generation is going to help change the patterns that we're in. And also community level is the level at which research is showing we're going to be able to change the climate, or resist climate change and make actual change on the ground. Question is about, what does data sovereignty look like in real time, and how is it working? And I'll say, I'm sort of poking into it newly. So, but the way that the group, who is mostly Indigenous, who I work with and would speak better to this than I would, is just the listening and feedback loop, the constant sort of what do you want to share? What do you want to share with us? What do you want to share with the public? What stays here, and sort of making it sort of consent-based at every step of the way is our goal. And next week will be sort of our big sort of first step into it with the folks we're working with, because we're actually going and doing site visits and interviews. So sort of weaving that into how we conduct ourselves is the goal.
And then
Co-authorship. Yeah. It is, Jim, do you want to speak more to the synthesis and lit review and authorship?
Well, we certainly hope that there will be co-authorship on the literature synthesis part of the project you mentioned with at least one Indigenous person. And also we're going through our tribal ROV for any interviews and things like that. And then this whole project really is about kind of sharing some of that information back, with the videos and other things that we hope to get that information back to themselves. So we're trying to be very highly aware of those kinds of things and to make this work relevant. And the advisory group is primarily people from different Indigenous backgrounds, and I think we have really good guidance on how to run this project.
Yeah.
I don't ask this as an expert. I was just curious what you're doing on your own, because
Yeah.
I'm navigating this world.
Yeah. And always want to be in conversation too. If you want to keep talking with each other after the fact. And so, by the way, so Jim was just saying in the synthesis, we are aiming for co-authorship, but we have this really great guidance from Indigenous group advisory group that is helping guide so much of the project. So that really helps. Yeah, Jim?
Well, Chris probably beat me to my first thing I want to say, which is Quivira Coalition doing amazing work. And you guys are way ahead of SWAAN in terms of the practitioner contact. You do have these ranchers participating very actively in Quivira Coalition work. But I actually wanted to ask you a totally different question. And you were just a kid, so you may not be all answering. But it's really fascinating how many trees have been established in the Sahel region.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about how water limits tree establishment here. Where we want to have trees, it's going to be a limiting factor.
Yeah.
What did they do to make tree planting so darn successful in parts of the Sahel?
Well, that's a
in an
great.
area that's drier than here.
Yeah. Well, I talked to my dad about this a lot, so I'll just share what my dad shared with me. And then Mick, if you're listening, we can also hear from you in the chat. Mick also lived in Niger for a number of years. So when Niger was colonized by the French, they brought with it their agricultural practices, and that included taking out all the trees and just clearing the land. And so the actual main thing that my dad learned at the time was that the big thing was actually just not cutting down trees. And that was helping them regenerate. There was also some cool things like Zy pits. So they would dig holes and put manure right in it. And I swear he told me this, but he doesn't remember anymore. But I thought he told me that they wouldn't even put seeds in the manure. They would just let the manure, like the seeds that were in the manure, grow and then take out the things they didn't want. And which I just think is incredible. Like, talk about natural regeneration. So yeah, it was mostly just stopping this practice that had been brought with colonization. And then, it's a lot of it, that area is grazing. So it created a lot of this food for the animals. And then the trees were mostly these acacia trees, which are nitrogen fixing. So that brought all these benefits. And yeah, so that's what I remember. But Mick, if you want to share anything else. Yeah.
I have never been to that region, but I have been through many a presentation, and the term I always heard was farmer managed natural regeneration. Which is
Yeah.
what you just said.
Yeah. Farmer managed natural regeneration. Andy just brought the term in. Yeah.
And Mick looks like
Can I talk directly?
You can.
I don't know if the rest of the audience hears it or not. That's why I'm asking.
They can.
Okay. My name's Mick O'Neill. I spent about 15 years in West Africa, Northern Ghana, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And as Leah said, a colonial practice was to, for the colonial governments and then the successive indigenous governments would commandeer all the trees that grew in the country, in French West Africa principally. And so the farmers did not have any ownership whatsoever of the trees growing on their own lands. And people were seeing that they were cutting them down. They were important. They had to get firewood and different things like this, but they were not doing any replanting. They were expecting the government to come in with seedlings and nurseries and all these other things. And then with the Greenbelt movement and other things, for farmers to see that they could do some things by themselves, there was also, especially in Niger, a recognition by the government that if farmers can manage their own trees, maybe they will manage more trees. And so the government relinquished the ownership of trees in the area, starting with Niger, and it continued to Mali and Burkina. And then the farmers didn't necessarily plant a lot of different trees. There were root systems already there, especially the Phyderbia albida, which used to be called Acacia Phyderbia, Acacia albida. And then these acacia, which are just fantastic because they have a reverse tree phenology, they shed their leaves during the wet season and they grow their leaves out during the dry season. So livestock just love these things because they're a leguminous tree that has real rich foliage. And then in the dry season, they have all the shade and they come and do, as who was talking about, poop. We get some poop out there. And so they fertilize those fields. And it's just been remarkable. The satellite imagery of the Sahel is just awash with these trees that existed at one time, but they were never allowed to grow to maturity. But now farmers are allowing them, but that gives them also a chance to sell more tree products, forage, fruits, timber, this sort of thing. So it's a remarkable story, but there's always a sad component of these remarkable stories. Al-Qaeda happened to come into Mali especially, and then move into Niger and move into Burkina. And right now the security in the country is just unbelievably poor. So we are hoping that things change in so many different ways that a lot of times the planting of trees has nothing to do with it whatsoever. So with that short little piece, I'll hand it back to Leah. Thanks, Leah. You did a great job.
Thanks, Mick. Good to hear your voice.
Yeah, it's going off of the, providing, working with private landowners that are maybe new to their forest, more forested land, and they're looking for solutions, whether it's, insect and disease outbreaks, or just they're trying to be stewards of the land. They don't have that geographic or historical context.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're providing recommendations to them on the possibilities of what they can do. I'm thinking about, your thesis and then a lot of what Kat said about, ways to sequester nutrients in a wash, or, these various practices that go back to Indigenous people.
Yeah.
How do I provide them with that context and give credit to the people that actually have been using these practices for a long time without coming off as an expert, because I'm not in that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think you just described the crux of the question that I deal with all the time. It's in my head. I'll try to say it to the virtual audience. The question was, if you're meeting with someone who is maybe newly stewarding land, like forested land, and you want to provide them both, resources, but also like accurate history and credit where credit is due, how do you go about that? Is that?
And I guess get them on board with the idea that there's an alternative direction that they can take it from what maybe they've read or heard or traditionally read.
Yeah, and get them on board with the idea that there's alternatives to maybe what they've learned before and previous. Honestly, that's such a good question. And I feel like that's like literally the question I swim in, because my job is to sort of provide resources and help people think creatively about these things. And I feel like I don't even have an answer. It's like, because it's so, I'm also surrounded by people who are doing it too. But one of the things that like comes in strong when you ask the question is like, I always think comes back to collaboration. Like, who are my partners that I'm collaborating with? Because, it is so important to highlight the Indigenous history. But that can be hard without meaningful, partnerships with Indigenous peoples. And it can happen, too often that there's sort of that like inviting, say, BIPOC folks in to present or speak, but the relationship hasn't been built and it's not necessarily a collaboration. So that's where I guess my constant sort of goal is like, how am I building meaningful relationships so that I don't have to be the one to answer people's questions or to guide people, but I can be part of a network of people that I can be like, oh, have you read Kat Thompson's thesis? You know, because that will give you some really good insights into the history here. And then like, yeah, bringing people together on the land, that's what I love to do. So I feel like maybe together we should just get tea and talk about it or something.
Sounds like this is the collaboration you're referring to.
Yeah, it's a great question. All right, I think I'm being escorted away. So thank you.
Let me get geared up for our next presentation. So next we have Jeff Adams with us. Except we're not full screen. There we go. So, sorry. Jeff is the founder and principal practitioner of Terra Sophia, an ecological design consulting, education, and landscape contracting firm based in Moab, Utah.
Thanks, Steve. All right, thanks everybody. Excited to be here. Share a little bit about some of my experience here in Moab and beyond. I've been self-employed doing permaculture and watershed restoration full-time for almost 20 years now. So it's really kind of like all I knew. I sort of realized after graduating from college that I was wonderfully unemployable, both by my demeanor and by my interdisciplinary studies. So I just launched right out and kind of hung the shingle on the wall and started to do this work. And back then, I guess I was, back 2006 and earlier, there wasn't a lot of opportunities. Even if I wanted a job in permaculture and in some of this work, there wasn't that much to go with. I did have the wonderful opportunity to work closely with Quivira Coalition a bunch of years. I lived and worked in Santa Fe and La Madera and some of those little communities in New Mexico. And that's where I really cut my teeth on the watershed restoration side of things, getting to work with Molly Walton and Avery when she was the ED and Sarah too. So yeah, Quivira, I can't speak highly enough about that organization and the holistic approach they take. And that a lot is rubbed off with me too. The Radical Center is kind of one of the founding things that the Quivira really launches off. And I love it too, because it's where do we find the common ground? Because we're all in this together. We might take different approaches to things, but at the end, we're all on the mothership here together, and we need to find out ways to work together. And so that's really, if I were to redo the order of these, I would do permaculture, water harvesting, then forest gardens. I was just trying to put the forest part first since it's an agroforestry thing. But so we've thrown around permaculture a bit. I just like different definitions depend on who you ask. I really see it as a holistic design process based on ethics that helps us to understand our holistic context so that we can be in better relationship with the systems that we're working with and that we depend on. And those systems can be the physical and ecological systems of the land and landscapes, but it's also what we often see as the invisible structures, or those harder to see systems that are our legal systems, our interpersonal systems, all the things that actually make what we do on the ground possible. It's actually kind of the landscape stuff, the stuff on the ground, I think is a lot easier than some of the interpersonal, some of the policy, finance, legal challenges that are always surrounding any project. And so it's important from a holistic permaculture perspective to understand on each given project, property, even sub part of a property, what's going on there, what's working, what's not working, are you legally allowed to do those things? I don't know if anybody's heard of Joel Salatin. He's got a great book, Everything I Want to Do is Illegal. And like, you know, we've kind of felt that, and Roz and I got to work with our local health department for like 5 years to legalize putting gray water out into the landscape in a simple gravity-based thing here in Utah. And so sometimes you got to change the rules to be able to do what you want and fit it in with a holistic context that works with your situation. And then so a big part of that is, you know, this concept of forest gardening. And one of the principles of permaculture is working with rather than against nature. And so it's working with those successional processes that Kelly talked about. It's like guiding and steering our plant communities and the associated animals and people and structures that inform those so that we can be moving our trajectory on a path that we want, knowing that it's always in this kind of dynamic equilibrium. We're not like, at least I'm not ever really looking for a static state. Like I'm a landscape contractor and so many people want me to come in and put something in and then it's done. And it's like, well, my work and contract might be done, but now it's you and it's your relationship. And so in a way, like I can't necessarily do permaculture for somebody. I can help them design a system in which they want to have a relationship with that system. In this case, a forest garden, to steward, harvest, tweak, and push it in a direction that works for them in their specific context. And really, before you get to putting in the plants, as Kat mentioned earlier, is planting the rain, planting the water, setting up the landscape so that it can physically hold, retain, and infiltrate that moisture that comes for free and is often treated as a nuisance in our modern society, especially in the urban environment. We're moving past that paradigm a little bit as we start to see more on green infrastructure and these water harvesting practices. But by and large, we're a very hydrophobic society. It's like, well, there's water, get it out of here. I'll bring mine back in a plastic pipe, thank you. And then like, so we set up these systems where we get rid of the resource and then we spend more to bring it back, when really, if we can just cut out some of that, you know, middle person or that extra techniques. And in this case, a simple called a curb cut. It was a parking lot. This is actually our local health department. So it's a beautiful representation of how the health of the land, the health of the water also impacts and relates to the health of the people and the health of the community. And so first thing we do, well, there used to be a lawn here. We got to rip out the lawn, put in a bunch of curb cuts, shape the land so that when the water does come, it can pool up and soak in. And then we choose our multifunctional perennial species to fill in the space around it. And so it's really kind of that sequence of how do we set up the system to not just receive the water, but then how do we build our whole landscape to be a sponge? How do we get our living soils to have enough structure, to have enough soil cover of the right type, whether that's living plants, whether that's rock mulches, whether that's an organic like wood chip mulch, to then hold that water so that it can be either utilized by the plants we want, or if you're in the right geological situation, soak back in and recharge either your aquifer or increase your localized soil moisture. And so depending on where you are, will kind of inform what sort of benefits you can get out of this. But it's really about setting things up to thrive. And so this is a little project just downtown Moab here. It's on 1/10 of an acre. It's owned by a nonprofit called the Resiliency Hub. We call it the Community Garden, with T as TEA, is like we grow a lot of tea plants on the site. And it's been a really fun journey. This has been, this is its 7th year of being something more than just a vacant land. And we've really been able to establish this like green oasis that's right along one of our bike paths. And we always have people saying, oh, I stop there all the time because it's 10 degrees cooler. And so we had talked a little bit about that urban heat island earlier. So this is a little green oasis where not only can you like get off of the hot, I think the road is like 80 feet wide there. There's a right turn lane, a center turn lane, a driving lane, another driving lane, 3 different bike lanes and a sidewalk all in this one stretch. And then we've got our little postage stamp of green. And so you can duck out, get out of the busyness, get in the shade, but then it's also loaded with edible and medicinal plants. So on the left, a little tough to see, there's Nanking cherry, there's apricots, there's white mulberries, we've got locust trees that, you know, nitrogen fixing, nice dappled shade. And then the whole understory is either medicinal, edible, or pollinator attracting species. And we've been able to pretty much push out most of the undesired species over time by occupying that space with stuff we want. Now, some people would look at that and say, hey, that milkweed's a weed. And we're like, well, maybe it is to you. Sure, it's growing like one. And we love that because we're getting to the point now where this also becomes a plant propagation station. It's like, oh, you need some plants. Okay, well, our mint, our milkweed is getting out of hand. So yeah, please dig it out of the path and inoculate the next site. And so that's what it looked like in 2016. And so I really see this as like our kind of tagline is from vacancy to vibrancy. So we took what was, it was literally fenced off, vacant parcel of land right downtown, barely even growing those early pioneer undesired species, like barely had enough ecological integrity to like grow cheatgrass. It was just, you know, one of those like beat down spots that we were able to procure. Actually, the landowner donated it to our group specifically to put in nature in downtown, so that if you go through downtown Moab, even if you don't want to, or even if you don't know it, you're going to get a dose of biodiversity. You're going to pass this and be like, whoa, something's a little different there, and keep going on your adventure. But it's worked out good. And so the first thing we did was we designed it to hold more moisture. And so we designed it as a creek system, which I thankfully learned about through my work with Quivira, and was able to bring that and replicate it in a lot of my landscape projects. Is how do we design these water harvesting features to actually look and function like natural creek systems? Obviously, there's unnatural components in terms of, you know, urban watersheds and drainage. And this particular one, at the time of this picture, was receiving stormwater runoff, but the water that you see here is flood irrigation through our secondary water system, the Moab Irrigation Company. So we designed it so we could fill up pretty much as much of the landscape as we could, let that water soak in, and then grow a bunch of plants. And so this was our first flush. So this was the early succession of that project, which is a lot of the pioneer species, a lot of like color stuff that likes full sun. And you can see how some of the trees are pretty small, especially like the kind of center left towards the back of the bus. That's the mulberry tree, a white mulberry tree that thankfully somebody had tried to cut down years ago. And now it's this beautiful coppice. So it's just got this like multi-stemmed structure that kids can climb up there and pick fruits from, and you know, overhangs nicely. And we had to trim it back a little bit because someone was camping there, but that's kind of a different thing. And then here it is. Sort of now it's filling in a lot. This was another flood cycle. The trees, the mulberries, I mean, it's got to be 30 or 40 feet tall now. And it's just amazing. It kind of goes with that the nutrients are in the soil if we can just get them active. And one of the things to activate that is the water. And so by adding water to this situation, we've been able to supercharge it in conjunction with all of the plantings that we've put in. And a big part of this and some of our other work here in Moab that collaborated with Roz on is the Bee Inspired Gardens initiative, is really trying to design landscapes to support pollinator health, as well as being water-wise, water conserving and water harvesting, and providing food and forage for people and other species, especially other species, in this case, the pollinators. And part of that's been building some of these bee hotels and bee houses. A lot of the native bees are actually solitary, kind of nesting. They don't live in hives like we kind of normally think of, that, you know, you drill some holes in wood, you put some cane grasses out there, or some canes with the holes in them, and they get colonized, they get occupied. And it's been great. I mean, most of our hotels fill up in Moab in the peak season, and so do our bee hotels. Like, it's just amazing. And then you put the pollinator species out there in front of it, and you've just made this like perfect situation for these ecosystem services to emerge and start doing a lot of good work and just being fun to watch and interact with, on top of all the human benefits of stuff we can eat, smell, cut flowers, herbal medicine type of stuff. Here's another project. This is at the Our Village Community Center, kind of on the west side of town. And they have a preschool on this site, and they're having an issue of every time it rained, this whole parking lot that's kind of in the upper right, including some giant buildings, just rushed across their property and flooded out their building. And so we're able to work with them and design this. And actually, this was before we planted it. We actually literally just put in the earthworks, and maybe like 3 weeks later, it rained like one of those just deluge gully washers, filled the whole thing, worked out great, got to soak in a bunch of water. The preschool didn't flood out. So success there. And then we're able to plant it and put in those pollinator species, including, they're hard to make out, but a lot of shrubby stuff, so that this will end up being a hedgerow shelter belt that not only provides those ecosystem services, but not everybody wants to look at parking lots and big trucks all the time. I mean, I know some people do. It's cool, you know, I mean, they're shiny and stuff, but like, you know, just sort of get a little buffer going there. So we're just really trying to stack the functions. And I think that's one of the principles I really like in permaculture, is this multifunctionality and like redundancy. So how can we get things so that we're not just dependent on one plant species? And I think that ties in well with agroforestry. How do we diversify enough so that if one species has a bad season, you've got a couple other things there? How do we have multiple types of flowering and medicinal plants so that there's always something blooming, not just for us to look at aesthetically, but so that all the diversity of pollinators can come do their work and help us get good fruit and berry crops out of it as well. And then other ways of just doing water harvesting. This is at the current, or I guess now the former USU campus here in downtown. It's just, again, a simple curb cut. You pick the right plants, you let that water come in, and it's just amazing the response that you get from the plantings. And this is something that, you know, I see this as like kind of an equivalent to a riparian forest buffer. It's like a water quality buffer strip. It's not very wide, but it's doing a lot of work because it's receiving especially that first flush of rain that's going to take the most of the gunk off the parking lot, and it's putting it into this situation where we've got healthy soils because they're biologically active by getting water, by having wood chip mulch, and by having all these living plant roots working their photosynthetic pathways down to get everything going. And it's it's pretty well documented that soil systems are way better at addressing pollutants than aquatic systems. And so anytime we can intercept runoff before it gets into a creek or a waterway and filter it through the natural living sponge of our soil mulch plant systems, we're going to reap those benefits and actually be able to hold and process and bioremediate, phytoremediate, clean up a lot of that stuff that ends up getting into our water and impairing our water quality. It can also be a real simple backyard type of thing. This is a residential project. The downspout actually comes in under these rocks. So when it rains, rather than having that water soak in, and in this case, it was actually infiltrating and coming into the house through likely a crack in the basement or just some poor drainage from back in the day. So we turned a problem, water, getting into a house, causing structural issues, into a resource by moving it away from the house and planting it into the landscape, where now these shrubs, so that's a Western sand cherry, a vitex, and a 3-leaf sumac, so a combination of native and climate appropriate stuff that has both yields for people, but are also beautiful pollinator producing species. And in this case, it's partly to screen things for the neighbor on the other side of the fence, and partly to not have to look at that plastic fence there. That's like, goodness. And so then kind of go into a little more detail. This is the property I live on. There's a bunch of different stuff going on. We've been tinkering with it for a number of years. I've been there for just over 7 now, and we'll kind of take a tour starting in the top along the driveway. We've got a shelter belt hedgerow windbreak with some cool stuff. We've got a forest garden on the south side of the house that is mostly deciduous. So in the winter, those go dormant, drop their leaves, and we get great passive solar gain into the trailer. And then we've got some more full sun, both kind of manicured landscape stuff that transitions into native habitat, and then back down into, on the right side of the picture, is more of our production gardens, which are partially planted at this point. And so here's the this like shelter belt. It's right on the property line. It's about 5 feet wide of like plantable space. Thankfully, the neighboring property doesn't mind that the trees grow over, into their airspace. And so, they get those benefits, but it's packed with species. The tallest thing there is an apricot tree. We've got, there's Siberian pea shrub, there's false indigo. We've got mulberry, ash trees, catalpas just volunteering. There's 3-leaf sumac, and then there's some Siberian elms. And I took the picture out, but we've been so this is also our west side. So this is just such key western shade in the summer, and the elms, which a lot of people really dislike, maybe for good reasons, maybe not, but they were kind of starting to overcrowd, and rather than trying to rip them out, we just polarded them. So we essentially just cut their head off, and now they reshoot, and we can manage those shoots as a resource. And it's sort of like our ongoing pizza party for the soil. Like, we can just clip back this fresh growth, add it to our compost pile. We use a lot of this brush and stuff to build pathways and terraces and ramps. And so we're actually using all of the biomass that we can produce on site, and actually a lot of biomass from other folks in the area. They bring it to us, and then we build stuff with it, and we layer it with just some common mineral soil that we can get from our quarry, and we grow topsoil in really quick order. We do add some water. You do need, water for that decomposition process to happen. And we're so dry here that it would take a long time if you just waited for purely natural precipitation to drive some of these. So then going around into the backyard, we were fortunate that when we moved onto the site, the tree and shrub canopy was largely there. So it was like we had a couple apricots, peach, both black and white mulberries. There's an apple tree. There's currants, chokecherry, Nanking cherry, and then some other like lilacs and native shrubs. And so we've been able to play with putting in the understory. What you see here mostly is alliums, the garlic chives, and the walking onions. Just love it here. They make for great, like, just go out and forage a little bit. And we've been adding in other stuff over time. We've been putting in some bird feeders. That's, again, we provide a service to the local wildlife of having this sheltered space, provide a little bird seed, and then they're there doing pest control. They're adding their manures. They're just kind of adding visual interest as well, to just have all those creatures fluttering around. And then back here, we've also pollarded our mulberries. They were getting too tall to reach. So we had 2 of them. We just off with their head, just took them off right at head height. And now it's got these great, the regrowth is these really nice, pretty straight branches that we've actually been able to, the picture on the right, I worked them from close to the trunk out and actually turned it more or less into a weeping mulberry, so that now you can actually reach the fruit easier. They're supple branches, so you can grab one and pull it down. So my daughter can like grab off of it, but it's also part of our sector management. So in permaculture, we refer to sectors as the wild energies moving through a site. So that's as you're sitting on your back deck and you can, look this way and, the neighbor's light's blaring at you. That light would be considered a sector that we can manage. So is the wind, sunlight, wildlife moving through. So we want to look at how do we design and steward our landscapes to work with these sectors, either block them, deflect them, or harvest them. And so in that process of bending over those mulberry branches, we're able to not only have better access to the fruits, but screen out the neighbors and kind of close in our canopy a little bit so that we kind of got more of a private outdoor living space, even if it's kind of looking straight at the neighbor's back door. And so just another fun little benefit of that on kind of like the home scale, backyard scale. And then actually one of my goals is probably this winter, once these go dormant again, I'm gonna try to do pole plantings of the dormant mulberries into a new area and grow a bunch more of them in this one part of the property that's pretty barren at the moment. And I've had success with other species. I think mulberries will work too. So I'll have an update on that maybe by the next conference. We did chickens for a while. Kind of mixing in animals are so important in these systems. We would always feel bad having the chickens cooped up. So we'd let them out and then they tear up our stuff. And so they got a new home. We love them. We'll get chickens again at some point, but we found that at least on the scale we had with the plants we had, they caused more harm in terms of just digging up stuff, especially in the spring when everything's little. It's like, oh, there went that whole patch of plants. And so over time, we're trying to plant more stuff that's a little hardier so that we can have a zone that they can free range in, just because it's, I don't know, it's hard to see them all cooped up.
Strange looking chicken behind the tree.
Oh, good eye. So that's our other visitor. Yeah, we commonly have bucks, deer. There's a bunch of them that live just on the other side. Is a arroyo with some riparian habitat, so there's always wildlife moving through. And yeah, they do us well, and actually they're great pruners. Like last year they pruned all of our tomatoes off the path and just like perfectly, so like I didn't have to get my clippers out or anything, but we could still, you know, plenty for us. So we just try to always overplant, knowing that it's easier to feed the deer and work with them a little bit than to try to like keep them off of everything. And that works for our context, not appropriate for everybody, but yeah, we love it. We've had that big buck just bed down right outside our living room window, just 5 feet from the house. It just sits there in the shade and looks in the window at us. Going for color and stuff in all seasons. I threw this one in because it's you can kind of see those canes that are cross-hatched there. When we moved onto this property, the landowner had started to dig a root cellar, abandoned a project, and then proceeded to throw 20-something years of brush there. So when we got there, it's just this unsightly, like massive sticks pointing every direction. And so thinking of how do we work with what we have, we ended up just chopping everything, packing it in place, working in some mineral earth and some wood chips. And after about 3 years of it settling and decomposing, we've now got it fully vegetated, or just about fully vegetated. Some stuff we've planted and some stuff like that purple aster that just, you know, blew in with the wind and is just an amazing pollinator species. And some people, what's that?
Google culture.
It is a form of it. Yeah, we didn't specifically add like composts or manures, but same exact concept. I actually call this my Google hillside because it's like built up into the hill, and yeah, you get it. So then moving from here, if we were to walk up there, we get into more of our full sun sort of cultivated native transition zone. On the right side of the picture is this thick hedge of greasewood shrubs, which at first I didn't understand or appreciate them enough. I was just like, they don't really have nice flowers. Their sticks are all kind of pokey, they're brittle. And I was getting ready to cut them down. And then we slowed down and said, wait, let's check this out. And as I've watched them over time, first I realized that you can actually prune them and manicure them and get them to look really nice. They're a perennial source of biomass. But then the ladybugs and the hummingbirds love them. Like they get these tiny little flower clusters that the hummingbirds are all over. And this time of year, these things are crawling with ladybugs and ladybug larvae and stuff. And then not only that is that they're so dense, it's essentially an outdoor wall. So when you're up on this part, you can barely see down into that lower forest garden. So it's now become something that I love to sculpt and work with to kind of form these like outdoor rooms, so to speak, because it's just such dense foliage on them. And so then this is, we're trying to get a few more trees going up here. This is the top of an old ridge. It's actually the only part of the ridge in the whole like neighborhood that didn't get bulldozed. It was just for whatever reason, when they put in the subdivision, it's large lot residential, so they're all 1 acre plus lots, but they bulldozed, pretty much punched a hole through the ridge, but didn't do this. So we still have like native black brush and the greasewood and saltbush and rice grass and other stuff growing on there. And then kind of in the foreground and midground, we put a lot of the sun loving stuff. We've got rosemaries and lavenders and just different culinary herbs. And then we're working on getting there's a plum tree here and then another peach tree that it was actually a volunteer sort of on the right side of the picture. And we're trying to get those to grow up to cast a little bit more afternoon shade on that zone because it just bakes up there, and just trying to kind of work with those microclimates without turning this particular spot into a forest, because we want some of that full sun zone to just be able to have the full diversity of species. And then that's the view of the top of the hill. I love it. We can see the whole watershed. We've got the view of the mountains and can see down to here in the portal. And then that's where it really becomes the transition to the more native stuff. We did a lot of rock mulching on the top of the hillside. It was pretty eroded and bearing. It's really hard to get stuff to grow after it's been pummeled by the rain and baked by the sun. It's just not much is really suitable for that type of, like, even weeds have a tough time growing because it's essentially there's like this little adobe kind of layer on the top that forms. And so by breaking that up, putting some of the rock mulch, we were able to get some of those benefits that Kat was mentioning that's been a practice for eons, and get some of that going and start to get some of the more hardy wildflowers there. And it's also where we start to get some of the native cactuses and kind of spikier plants sort of off to the edge. So it's not necessarily something you're brushing by, but that we can get up there and get some yields from the prickly pears. And actually all of these, the cholla and prickly pear, were just cuttings from somebody else's plants. So now ours are at this stage where we can start to break off pads and propagate those out, and really trying to push this property to being a bit of a nursery, not necessarily container stock, but just in situ, let stuff grow, seed out, and then take it and use it for either more stuff on this property or other properties. And then we just have these emergent qualities of the best protected or hardest to harvest arugula ever. It just kind of showed up. I really wanted to eat it, but I just didn't dare. I was like, that one's staying. And then here we are on the kind of the other side of that hillside. You can kind of see the remnants of the rocks. This was a barren eroding. This was the bulldozer scar of the property. And it was just one of those like just hot, barren, kind of steep enough that nothing would grow. So we've terraced it over the years using a combination of brush, logs, weeds, and dirt. And then we're using that combination, adding water and turning it into soil. And we had great success. We harvested dormant 3-leaf sumac, Rus trilobata, from a different part of the property and used that with the seed heads of blanket flower and Indian rice grass as the building blocks for the terraces. So we built the terraces using this live dormant material. And then we've added, we do have to irrigate it a little bit, but now it's all growing and fall. And we'll actually this winter take cuttings from this and go and plant out the next spot. And to me, that's just one of these like awesome, fun things, is that we can take dormant sticks and they'll become living plants in a new area again if we put them in the right conditions. It's just awesome. And so that's what it looked like partway through. So the middle down by that pick is already like in the works of doing the terracing, and then you can see the kind of barren eroding stuff up above it, which now is Maximilian sunflowers, blanket flower, sumac, stuff like that. And then the bottom right little inset picture is before we did any work. There was one little rabbit brush growing at the toe of the slope, and that did get sacrificed to become part of the terrace, but we've added way more vegetation than we took out.
Jeff, real quick, can you speak to the amount of approximate tons of waste that you help divert from the landfill by allowing the community to bring their debris?
I haven't converted it, but so we did this and just past that building, you can kind of see that pile of brush. That is we have 2 new geological landforms on this property, or really organic landforms. That particular one at its deepest is probably 40 feet deep, and it's literally any type of weedy material and organic tree trimmings, logs. We layer it there with our mineral earth and just keep layering it up. And we soak it every once in a while to accelerate that breakdown process. At this point, it's probably maybe 60 feet long, and then a good like 20 to 30 feet wide. And it's on the slope, so it kind of the volume calc's not straight on the numbers, but it's sturdy enough to hold a fully loaded dump truck carrying 17 tons of material. They just back right out onto our brush pile and dump material and go. And we have another one of these down at the other end of the driveway. And so huge quantities of material that's not going to the landfill. Our landfill does chip and resell any clean green waste, but anything that stumps or anything that's got any like dirt in it just gets buried as if it was like plastic rubbish or something. So we've been able to divert, over the last 4 or 5 years, just huge quantities of material. And I've dug into this one with the backhoe, full depth, 15, 20 feet, and it looks like Iowa soil. Like it's just black and rich, and like you can find a couple little remnants of sticks, but the decomposition is just amazing there. And it's at the stage now we've got enough material. We're just waiting to bring in a machine to like shape it. We're going to punch a little road down it, and then it'll be a windbreak with a sunken little farm plot. And then we're going to terrace up the whole sides and get a bunch of trees and shrubs growing for further windbreaks, but not tall enough to block the views.
And this is just brush, or you were adding some soil to it?
We had some soil, so we call it reject sand. It's essentially there's a gravel pit at the south end of the valley, and they screen out all the aggregates and cobbles and stuff like that. And it's just like a mineral earth. It's great stuff. People use it for natural building like cob. So it's got some clays, but it's also pretty sandy, has some little like smaller gravel. So we layer that in. And we hope people, bring enough stuff, because, we have developers that are scraping properties and bringing us literal dump truckloads of topsoil that we add to this too. So that mineral component is key to kind of bind and hold the moisture and really get that decomposition and soil building going.
Hey, Jeff, can you repeat the questions and comments when you do respond to people, just so we can hear too?
Yeah, sorry about that. So on that one, the question was, is it just organics, or are we adding some sort of soil to it? So now as we're kind of descending down the hill, I'm a big fan of edible pathways. So it's just like grazing is one of my favorite things. Like for me, I'm a grazer. I like to walk around and eat stuff. So we put in these goji berries, and they're a great thicket former. And we've been giving away some propagules of them because they're just spreading. And, again, some people see that as an issue. I see that as free resources that then we can go and give to friends or inoculate other parts of the property. And it's just super nutritious. And then we drop down into what we call our forest, or our courtyard garden. It's this kind of sunken area. It's got the 2 sheds. You can kind of see one, the metal on the left, and then another metal shed on the right. And then we built a little earthen wall on the other side. So it's pretty well contained, meaning it's well out of the windbreaks. And then it had one locust tree there. And since then, the locust has been spreading, which we love. Locusts are great in this climate. They'll just show up places. And, it's kind of that same concept of, well, what shows up, let it grow and tend it. And, if you don't want it later, at some point when some of these get bigger, we'll probably pollard them just so we can keep as much sunlight as we want, because this is where we start getting into more of our crops. And in this picture, you can see some cabbage, a couple different types of basil, kale, some cherry tomatoes. There's, now we're starting to mix in some of those annual, more common food crops with the perennials, and having that overstory of the locust tree. There's also kind of the center right there's a Nanking cherry, which are great little fruits. They have a lot of pit, but it's still a great little fruit. And then hyssops and just good smelling stuff that'll bring in the pollinators and kind of create that natural pest control, so that our cabbage doesn't get too covered in aphids, as they tend to. And then just outside, so you can actually see This is looking back into that courtyard garden. That wall on the right is actually made with a bunch of junk from the property, meaning there's like an old raft frame, there's an old ladder that I think you can see in the, maybe there's a different picture, but I've essentially built a structure of the fence with like broken frost-free hydrants and things to form, and then we wove a arundo cane. And I know arundo has a bad rap in a lot of circles, but in a contained place where it's nowhere near a waterway, it can be a great landscape plant. In my opinion, though, you can't plant it here. We did have access to some cuttings and we were able to weave those to finish making the fence there. And now we've got grapes growing over it, and really like making transitions and archways so that you kind of have this clear sense of passing from one zone or room to the next. And then I just had to throw in another picture. This is Roz's place, the first permitted residential gray water system in the state of Utah. So this is all gray water, which is untreated wastewater from your laundry machine and or shower, not toilet, not kitchen. And they've just got an awesome diversity of fruits and berries and pollinators and herbs grow in there, just fed basically on what in other cases would be considered a waste resource, your wastewater and your stormwater runoff. You put those together with the right plants and shaping the land, and we can really create some abundant landscapes here. And so, yeah, with that, we're happy to entertain any questions, comments, anything.
I see you're using a lot of mulch for weed control or anything else, controlling your weeds.
So the question was, we're using a lot of mulch for weed control, and the question was anything else to control our weeds. And really, it's us. So the mulch kind of buys us time as we get the plants that we want to take up the space. And then the rest is we kind of just go out there. A lot of it's me. It's like, 10, 15 minutes in the morning with a cup of coffee, and you pick a few things. And if you just kind of stay on it and never let it get out of control, we found it's not really a big deal. And some of our paths, it's like we pull like 4 little blades of cheatgrass a year off of them. They're just not growing. And I think that's because we're pushing the soils in that fungal, because that's really what those wood chips do, is they're holding moisture, they're suppressing weeds, but they're also feeding the soil and really helping it become fungal dominated by getting that good decomposition. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, Ross.
So another example, just said you were futzing.
Oh,
But,
always.
so
Always futzing.
With the community garden, you can abbreviate because we repeat it, but can you speak a little bit to the key in the topic and the more social aspects that you're weaving back into the community with these projects?
Yeah, totally. So the question was, what are some of the social aspects that are coming with some of these projects? And it was specifically aimed at that community garden, which was one of the first projects I showed. And yeah, we do a range of programs there. One of them is Tea and a Topic. And really, as we put that space together, a lot of it was to just have a place where people could just show up and be and have conversations. And some of that we organize and advertise and say, hey, we're going to talk about permaculture Tuesday at 6, or we're going to talk about waste management. And like, we organize that, but a lot of it also just emerges and happens. Like, I hold meetings there. A lot of other people just choose it as a place to meet because it's shady, it's open. You don't need to like call anybody and make a reservation. It's just kind of there for people to use. And so we really try to create spaces for people to thrive along with the plants and the pollinators and everything else. And then other benefits of that specific project is the educational point. And we've also already pulled a bunch of harvests of plants and like herbs and fruits and stuff, so people can come forage on their own. And we've done some organized stuff of getting some of those yields into the hands of folks that really need it.
I know Moab is smaller, but I'm curious if you've run into sort of institutional or policy barriers that, like, I guess you said the gray water, but are there others that you found you've had to overcome, or has that been a pretty welcoming space?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the question was, are there other barriers kind of with the politics and the frameworks of the town that have kind of informed our ability to do some of this work? And I'd say in general, we've gotten a lot of support. And at the same time, these are on private land. And we're still working on trying to like institutionalize and like working with folks at the city to try to like get some of this stuff on some of our public spaces as well. And I think in general, there's support, but it's not always written into the budget ahead of time, or there's staff turnover, or there's other things that have kind of held back this from becoming the like, you know, the new paradigm across, you know, all landscapes. And, you know, some of those are easier to overcome than others. I think there's some things with like staffing stuff at the city level, like something like this, it's lower total maintenance, but it's more specialized maintenance of, you know, you're pruning back 20 different types of plants versus mowing a lawn. It's just a different maintenance regime. So you need different skill sets and timing of that. So we're going to keep working on getting through some of those. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so let me close this.
Optimize.
All right, so our next presenter is Denise Devnick. She's the founder and director of the Permaculture Design School at the PDC Permaculture Institute. She has 8 years of experience designing and implementing water catchment, passive desert on contour, water catchment, passive desert on contour flowing into infiltration basins, swales, hugel beds, rainwater harvesting, gravity flow, stormwater, and gray water use. Denise also teaches permaculture design courses to property owners. She earned a bachelor's degree in social work from Brigham Young University, and we will let her go.
So Beverly and Steve, don't freak out. I'm changing my presentation because time-wise, I want to make sure I show you what we've been able to do. And then later, I'm going to toot the horn of the best examples in the world if we have time. So I'm going to start with this. Can everybody see it okay? So we are catching really good. So it's going over the sidewalk, running down and going inside the pipe right there. And then over to the other end of the pipe, and it's coming out perfectly right there. You see the water. So it does work, you guys. Good job, Joshua. There it is, you guys. We have water from the roof all the way to the top of the garden. Woohoo! It works, Joshua. Wow. Isn't that beautiful, you guys? Listen to that. We shouldn't be wasting what precious drinking water we have when we're in moderate to severe drought in Utah right now. The water really comes down there. Okay. Just bring it there beautifully. And that's just off one side gutter. Gravity. And literally coming down. And then along this pipe. Through the garden, to the highest point in the garden. Okay, here we go. So I gotta keep this under. Look at that water coming from there and down in the infiltration basins. So we'll have to see how well they drain. Look at that. We're getting so much water is going right over the spillways and right down into the next ones. That's pretty amazing, guys. That's how infiltration basins work. Look at that. Wow. That's beautiful. Couch is there, comes down, elbows, and then all level through here. on this side comes down from here and goes up to the top. So this is a current student with 100 acres in Arizona that lives in Centerville, but they'll be moving down. We are doing catchment ponds off the hillside. They get their rain in the summer. And we've put in 500 plants of native hardy drought resistant in 2 sections of zone 1 around. This is where they'll be living, greenhouse, solar, and this is another part of zone 1 that we've put in native trees. 450 trees and shrubs have been put in to his property so far. We use the water swales. We helped him, like I did here 8 years ago, contact Arizona State University, find out about native plants. And with our database, we knew a lot of the plants that would help to design where they should go, depending on sectors. This was Becky's 40 acres on the Sevier River by Scipio, and she killed 450 trees in 6 years. And then she came here and said, help, I don't want to kill any more plants and trees. So we helped her design this. And at our PermaBlitz last year, we put these different guilds in and water systems. Those are our current and past students that come every year to our PermaBlitzes, where we have someone, I call it garden barn raising, put in a garden in a day. This is not the 40 acres, just the zone 1. And we had to use different techniques because of the wind, also cattle from neighbors that come and eat everything. And then 2 months later, she was so happy to see how green and lush. We use sunflowers as what I call quick growing shade, cover crops, as the little perennial trees and berry bushes and canopy trees start to grow. This is our PermaBlitz that we put together every year for one of our student families' designs. This was in Bluffdale, 1.5 acres. You can see all these on our YouTube channel, Utah Valley Permaculture. We include lots of youth groups. This was an Eagle project, and they dug the hugel bed by hand. Here's just a few of our other students' designs over the last 7 years. This is a simple backyard that Bob designed with water catching off his roof. He'd like to get it off the street. And then his guilds that he put in. This is the Oldham 7 acres in Benjamin, Utah. They would like to have a store to sell all the varieties of berries. They get to practice in our classroom experimental garden here. They learn how to put in basins. They learn how to use mulch and how to strategically move water through the property. They practice, and they all come with their kids, which is so much fun. I love teaching the kids. So we've researched and planted over 100 native trees in this food forest and plants and everything. We prefer perennials. I'm tired of watering vegetables. My perennials are doing so well, as you'll see in a second on the virtual tour. But I have 3,500 plants that I would like to find out A to Z, all the characteristics of these plants, the benefits, everything. It is so beautiful to learn the relationships of plants and all the ecosystem. This is our open house. We love to give tours, have music playing, taste and tour, I call it, because they get to taste all the varieties of food we can grow in cornmeals. Is our fig tree here. That's 3 years old now and loaded with beautiful figs. Under our beautiful black mulberry, this is the youngest black mulberry tree we have here. And we have a white mulberry as well. Underneath, we plant all sorts of little plants. We've got beautiful borage right here. We've got calendulas coming up. We have a gorgeous ground cover of sweet potato. little strawberries, and what we call our living mulch carpet of beautiful flax right here. This gorgeous little flax, which is great for us to eat. Oh, but then turn around and feed your plants more nutrient-dense food. This is what we call our Zone 1 kitchen garden. And the kitchen garden catches water off the roof when there's rain, and it comes down on contour and winds like a snake's hair on contour. And that's where the water would flow, or you could actually put your irrigation through level, winding through this kitchen garden. The ground was covered with 12 inches of wood chips, grew the most amazing soil full of fungi. You saw little mushrooms when it rains. We use that good soil to build the bed. These are just ground level beds right here. And the soil that's growing in here is so amazing, full of everything alive. So when you dig down into this beautiful, rich black gold, you've got worms, you've got all sorts of beautiful living things in here. Look at the baby potatoes. Isn't that fun? But you see, this was sandy soil. Now you've got gorgeous living soil with life in it. That's what you want to raise in your garden. You want to raise soil. You're not just growing vegetables, you're growing soil, living soil. Like in our beds, you guys, look at that life in the soil. You see all those red wiggler worms? This is the kind of soil you want to grow. And all those microbes are what are the microbiota for the plant. We have them in our digestive tract. They have their digestive tract in the soil, and that's the only way the plant can be fed fertilizer from these beautiful microbes in the soil. So we have our canopy tree, which is picked specifically not only to create filtered light and shade this whole kitchen garden zone 1, but he's also white willow bark, which is the inner bark which make aspirin from. So he's a pain reliever. His branches, when you put them in water, actually create growth hormone to help other plants grow. So he has so many great values. And then, this is 6 years old. He was just a little tree at the nursery. In 6 years, he grew this fast. So he's got a lot of value, this amazing white willow tree. So that's why we picked him in our design as our canopy tree. Here we have another cover crop, which is a buckwheat. And you know you can eat that for cereal in the morning, but make sure you sprout it or ferment it. Wonderful tomatoes right there. You can see a little tomato that's ripening in this bed. We've got peppers also in this bed that are about to flower. And then he's got these beautiful sunchokes that I kind of invented because in Utah it's so hot and dry. But when all these little plants were young, and I'm not talking annuals, even the little perennial berry bushes and trees, there was no shade, and it's so hot in the summer sun, 100 degrees, that I had to come up with temporary shade. I first tried sunflowers, because I love the bees and the birds that come with sunflowers, but they weren't as easy to manage. Then I saw these Jerusalem artichokes, or sunchokes, they're also called, and they grow straight up. They're great stalks for the plants to grow up, because tomatoes are vines, but they're also great shade, and they're the best tuber food like potatoes, and you can eat all winter long, dig them out in the winter. They don't freeze. So you can literally use these as shade. And they'll have beautiful yellow flowers in the fall. On top, just one flower, but we use them as quick growing shade. That's what this is. Quick growing shade. I never heard of anybody doing that. Just grapevines growing over in the desert, but I decided I want to have shade here in Utah. These are long here, blackberries, raspberries. We have a native to Utah heirloom tree. This is called a Patawanec plum. Sometimes they've named it American plum, but when the Native Americans introduced this to the settlers, the pioneers in Utah, they found out about this heirloom Patawanec plum. We can't wait till these ripen so we can taste our first Patawanec plum here, which is really wonderful. Because of the vegetation in this ecosystem that you've created, because of the trees and the plants, the cover crop, ground cover, everything, you're getting such a wet coolness in here that things like tropical Polynesian taro root, turmeric, beautiful leaves, okay, ginger grows in this. So you can grow all these beautiful little plants, calendula, valerian, lemon basil. Everybody's happy, and here's another little carpet, a cover crop of flax right here. And behind me, we've got buckwheat. Our lettuce now is going to flower. So plants in here are loving the coolness that we have with our wonderful spearmint right here. All these plants are loving this filtered light in here. because they don't bake in the hot sun. They don't need as much water, and the cover crops are holding the moisture in the ground so it doesn't evaporate. And so it feels wonderful in here. It's like a little rainforest effect. They're creating a microclimate. And instead of rows of organic monoculture, that people are just growing vegetables in rows, I'd rather do this. My vegetables grow beautifully, my greens, everything. My herbs grow beautifully in here. Berry bushes grow well. And look at all the red catawba grape straight up. All this food is all growing in layers of a forest in here. So what we do in permaculture, we're letting nature do what it does best instead of controlling it. We learn from it and we work with it. And then we can see all the benefits, all these plants and all these insects and all the microbes and all the birds and the snakes and you name it, all of wildlife is in here and they're all balancing out together. They all know what they're supposed to do. So everything works great together here. These other problems are overabundance of anybody. Everything is balancing out because it's natural. It's a natural ecosystem that's happening here if you let all the plants do what they want to do. And they're under the filtered light of these trees, and they're being hidden by my quick growing shade of sunchokes hiding the west sun at the end of the afternoon that would be so hot, baking on these little plants. And so we can grow a lot of greens all through the summer. A mineral accumulating comfrey, growing with tomatoes, giving them, as we call it, shop and drop when these leaves are ready to give to, let's say, a little tree. We feed them to the tree, and that feeds minerals that will be decomposed by the microbes. And that will feed the tree the minerals that it needs to grow healthy and strong. And then here's our little thermostat. Outside it was 98 degrees, and it's 79 in here. There's a huge difference in temperature.
So that was inside, the average throughout the summer, while outside and my neighbors that never come out, it's 100 degrees or more. And we went from $300 in the beginning of water bills, and we went down to 59 or 53 in 2020. And last year in August, we were at 64. So that's been a huge difference. I'm so excited, though. Jeff Lawton can have a complete food forest.
This is what you're creating. You're keeping moisture.
In 9 years, but he's in the subtropics. So I'm guessing in Utah to have a completely self-sustainable, living only on rain, needing no care, go away from it, and it'll live on forever without me. I'm guessing it's about 15 years, at least that. And so I'm hoping, but we are working. We can't believe how little water this system takes now because of the design and the water systems and everything.
Able to grow things that normally wouldn't grow, like you saw that taro root, and everything is just lush and healthy and delicious. And then what we do is what's called a spectrometer. You do a test on nutrient density by the sweetness of the fruit. So when we test these, they test twice as much, twice as high as what you would get even organically grown. So where a tomato was a 9 in our food forest, it was a 14. There's a huge difference when you're growing like nature like this. And then that the Native Americans use these sumac berries. This is called a smooth sumac. So it grows lower, and it's growing beautifully all across here. And that's one of the 35 berries we have here. So this year, we don't know what happened, but something hit our food forest, and it started to dry out lots of trees, fruit trees, as well as berry bushes. This one was all dried out, and it had to be cut back of all the dead, and now it's growing back. It's growing back beautiful, little berries right there coming up. This is all new growth since he was hit in June. And we're so excited to see it come back strong. This is a native one that we bought from the Native Utah Association nursery, the reclamation nursery, that helps us get a lot of native berry bushes and other plants. Something of these wild native plants that grow out in the deserts here of Utah, especially in compacted soil because they have deep tap roots, they actually don't want water. They taste one of these. Oh, they're so delicious. What's great, this is the second most nutritious berry in this food forest. The first one is a sea buckthorn, but this one has protein, lycopene, vitamins, minerals. This is high nutrient density. This is a great one that you just want to eat or make syrup of because it's going to give you all those nutrients to boost your immune system, make it beautiful. Trumpet flowers, as my best friend, 89-year-old farmer Grant always tells me, food feeds the stomach, but flowers feed the soul. Favorite have orange Google bed with logs in the ground, and it's amazing. You've got cover crop of buckwheat here. These are got gorgeous nasturtium flowers right here, which are edible and very spicy. These beautiful, beautiful flowers and these beautiful leaves. Buffalo berry, another native to Utah. They'll have little tiny red little berries. This is our wonderful white mulberry, was loaded with white that turned lilac. Mulberries all over this guy. If you look up at the sky, look at all this. It was all loaded with mulberries. So you got some blueberries right here. Behind a golden currant and under, look at this gorgeous sky. This is called a black locust. And he grew from a little stick, 12 inches tall, so skinny than my finger, into this in 6 years. Isn't he beautiful? He does a great canopy cover as well. And then you've got these beautiful elderberries. These aren't ripe yet. We're going to make elderberry syrup this winter. Foot plus tall fennel bush. Look at the size of this beautiful fennel. And he's so potent because of the nutrient density we're getting. But you see how we've created this amazing shade with all the mints growing and other plants underneath? All the grapevines are growing. And look at all those grapes hanging from him right there, as well as right there. It's just beautiful to see. And then underneath, because it's growing nice and cool, we have these beautiful little called snowberries. Normally, they came out and produced berries in December, but we started flowering again this summer, and there's little snowberries. It's so beautiful to see. And there's a little horehound that normally only grows in the desert. They used to make candy out of horehounds like this. It's really tiny over there called a juby berry, and here's a goomy berry. Everything grows so big and beautiful here. What normally the size of a black currant is this. That's as big as a black currant gets, we think. Well, not in this garden. Since the second year, every year, our black currants have grown to this size. You look at this size. That's really big and beautiful. Gorgeous black currants. Look at this one. Look at the size of that one. You see? Everything grows huge in this garden. Look at the size of this gorgeous comfrey. Although we've chopped and dropped it and taken all the leaves to feed to this downshore pear above it, this is how big it grows back over and over again. It comes back this big and strong with the hugest leaves. You see these humongous leaves of comfrey. Full of almond tree. This is all-in-one sweet almond. He's just starting to open right now, right here. But look at the size of these almonds behind this beautiful nasturtium. Sage, and we have our beautiful mints all along the edges of our beds and all along the edge of the garden. We have 1 million bees of all different sizes and shapes. You see the tiniest one flying around? That's a medium. There's miniature little tiniest ones in here. They're so beautiful to see so many sizes, shapes, and colors of bees. Give them something good to eat and then they won't bother your silly vegetables. So high in minerals, grasshoppers, slugs, but if you don't water at night, they won't come out of the ground. But let them eat and munch on all this stuff, because I got millions of these leaves. So here's a little sweetness here. That is a wild, delicious blackberry. That's what we're going to taste, okay? That has so much sweetness. So when they start to dry out a little bit too, they're going to be sweet. So let's try a couple here. They're starting to get sweet. Moshe, you want to try? Okay, let's try. This one's going to be the sweetest ones. These little ones here, because they are drying. So that's when all the sugar comes in. When they're shiny like this, they're not as sweet. Taste that. Weren't the first ones really sweet? Now taste that one. Not as sweet. I know. I'm very picky. Fungi doing their decomposing work under the ground, right? In the living soil. This is their flower. that little mushroom, because you have moisture in here. That's their flowers right there. And isn't it beautiful, a little carpet of cover crop right there, keeping the moisture in from evaporating. These are our gooseberry row, but they've already ripened and disappeared. Sorry, you guys. But we have all these gooseberries along here. They like the coolness in here of the shade. They really love that. So these, and we'll get a second batch of golden raspberries. So you can, with a hardy kiwi growing up the trellis, there's our beautiful red cornelian cherries right there. Aren't they gorgeous? They're the most beautiful color that you've ever seen in your life. Look at those gorgeous red cornelian cherries right there. That's just something you don't see every day. Most people are like, I've never even heard of it. My omega-7s right now on these beautiful 190 different component little berries called sea buckthorn berries. They are beauties. This is our 3rd year in a row. And this is the teenager. No, this is the teenager here. You look all the way up and it's got all those berries up there. This is the mother that's growing inside the peach tree. If we can create an ecosystem like this that sequesters the carbon and the pollution, it cools the planet down 20 degrees, as we've proven. It also will help the hydrology cycle so we're not flood, drought. It helps all the climate problems, the erosion, the lack of resources like water and other things. What we're doing is we're letting nature do the work. So this 6-year example is a food forest.
Also done a lot of regenerative agriculture. I did apply for a SARE grant, but we didn't get it. So my farmer grant let me do a project on his land, cover cropping, mulching by leaving the plants there, and added more mulch the first year. We didn't let him till it. Next door, we were comparing to his regular agriculture. I used 1/3 the water he did the first year. We grew in his greenhouse the seedlings as test subjects of vegetables to see how they would do out there. We actually went 2 weeks in a hot summer, August, and didn't water the plants to see how well this would work. His sand became filled with all these insects that showed up because we were regenerating the soil. And it was hard to work with because these farmers, they don't let you put any shade on their property. And so it was really difficult to grow in that hot sun. I have a lot of appreciation for farmers. And so that was really interesting, but to be able to turn his over agricultured 89 years, he used to be on a 160-acre dairy farm. He owned a nursery for 55 years. We just lost him 2 years ago, but he learned permaculture. He taught me so much wisdom of farmers. And I just am so grateful that I got to do that. And then we were able to help other farmers to do the same thing. In Delta, we've got a 500-acre farmer with 500 cattle. And he went out and saw gay browns. And he's been doing the same thing. And he sells us all the cover crops, which are untreated, that you can't find anywhere. But what I wanted to do also is not just toot my horn for the school and what we've been able to do, but kind of use my mentors to really get the point across, because I'm so grateful to find this group of people who really want to coordinate together. And I want to show what's been done around the world by these amazing mentors. This is famous John DeLue Ecosystem Restoration Camps. He's really figured out how regenerating the soil is going to make a huge impact on everything from economics, finance, employment, climate mitigation. Sorry, I forgot to turn the little music down. Here in Utah, I was just at the Utah Lake Symposium. We really have a problem with our reservoirs. Gunnison's got no water left in their reservoir, and we are losing more and more. The Great Salt Lake is so low that it's blowing dangerous dust. The Lake Powell hydraulics are exposed, can't produce electricity. Utah Lake is half full. In 21, we were over our 19% usage on lawns. In 2018, in 75% of Utah in exceptional drought, Governor Herbert said that 60% of the drinking water was going to the lawns, yet there's still no restrictions. And lately, what's been frustrating as I did more research is Utah has been artificially cloud seeding since the 1950s. And this is a very dangerous process. And I'm hoping they'll learn that trees have natural bacteria on their leaves, which is the hydrology, part of the hydrology cycle. And that if we put the vegetation back, which we'll show examples in a second, we will change this instead of this destructive practice right here. This was this year.
Look at that tail. All those blossoms that are being beat up. And just listen to that thunder. Non-stop thunder for the last 10 minutes. Doing to the cameras.
Ice crystals basically pounded our blossoms right off the trees. There were stories all across from fruit growers about the freeze, but it was the actual mitigation of cloud seeding, and others along the benches where this crystal is created by the burners. They lost their pears, their peaches.
At a flower that's been this burnt.
We tested the blossoms and they're dead.
They're dead. There's black. That's what you see in there.
We looked at the floor and all these blossom had been pounded right off these trees. No peach, no plum, no cherry, no nectarines this year.
No cherries.
We were loaded. We were so excited to get all this fruit again this year.
And put back the vegetation that will bring back the hydrology cycle, and we can get out of this 20-year drought. That's the answer. They just need to.
If we could just educate these departments, this is Division of Water,
And there's more and
how
more
we can use vegetation to bring back and get us out of this bad drought cycle. Cool the temperatures. Robert Davies is famous for his temperature mitigation research, data research over the years. In 2016, he presented the differences between reforestation and geoengineered weather. And he basically said that he loved this. And he just wrote me this the other day. Dear Denise, congratulations on the success you're having with your food forest. Temperature moderation and low water use, just wonderful. He's the one that gives me the data, as well as a lot of meteorologists. With respect to Utah temperatures, Utah as a whole is warming at about twice the global average for the last 5 decades. That's Rob Davies. At a symposium 3 years ago, Dr. Davies mentioned our school's work on regenerative agriculture and sustainable food systems. And it's hard to hear, but he basically says that what we're teaching is a key point of the equation.
Agriculture and sustainable food systems, which are absolutely a piece of the equation, a big piece.
In climate mitigation.
Educate yourselves.
Then at the Salt Lake City United Nations Civil Society Conference, I presented the solution to climate change, ecosystem restoration. NASA has talked about deforestation as being 40% of the problem in the world. This was my banner there. I just sometimes get a little overzealous in trying to get a point across. But basically, what we were talking about is the deforestation. And then one of my students made this little spoof, you guys. I thought this would be fun to share with you. But it gets the point across of what we need. And the world leaders know this, okay? So that's why I picked these people as the ones to tell this. I call it How to Save the Planet
Today,
for Dummies.
I'm pleased to announce the United States will join 1 Trillion Trees Initiative.
Planting trees is nowhere near enough, and it cannot replace rewilding nature.
And the devastating loss of biodiversity are the greatest threats humanity has ever faced. You end up with breaking the hydrological cycle.
Totally dried out, and then trees were planted, and now the waters come back and people are drinking from them.
Draw down atmospheric carbon, and one great natural technology to do that is in the form of trees and grasses.
This is not a drill.
There is a magic machine that sucks carbon out of the air, costs very little, and builds itself. It's called a tree. Nature is a tool we can use to repair our broken climate.
It is that simple. Protect, restore, plant.
What I'm hoping is to actually create a central website where anyone in the world could actually find out simple steps of where to find native seeds and plants, how to restore the water by putting vegetation. So I put together a little spiel. After I interviewed in Park City, we brought all the mountain towns, mayors, sustainability directors, and the owners of ski resorts. And our meteorologists and Dr. Davies didn't give them very good news about our losing of our snowpack on our mountains, which is 60% of our drinking water. And so they were looking for answers. And so I interviewed Dr. Goodall, and I love the answer she gave me.
May I ask you, Ethiopia planted about 500 million trees. Rwanda has done the same thing, and they've seen reversal of climate change problems. The hydrology cycle comes back to normal. Have you seen some of this personally?
Well, I've seen that all around in the countries where our youth program operates.
Yes.
The young people are planting trees, and they're planting hundreds in Burundi and in Tanzania. I haven't seen the program in Ethiopia, but I know about it.
Yeah.
And you know, there's this new program planting, I think it's 3 trillion trees.
Yes, I've seen the results though.
I've seen the results.
It works,
Yeah,
doesn't
even
it?
in our programs.
Yes.
We have one water source where people used to go and drink water, and it totally dried out. And then trees were planted, and now the water's come back and people are drinking from it.
Well, we're going to share that with the world. Thank you.
This man is an amazing filmmaker.
This is China's Lus Plateau. Until recently, this was one of the poorest regions in the country. A land renowned for floods, mudslides, and famine. But with the fanfare comes the hope of change for the better. My name is John D. Liu. I've been documenting the changes on the plateau for 15 years. Local people were constructing a new landscape on a vast scale. Unspoiled valleys in neighboring Sichuan show us how it might once have looked. How could a landscape with such potential have been reduced to this? The relentless grazing of domestic animals on the slopes meant that there was no chance for young trees and shrubs to grow. The rainfall no longer seeped into the earth, but simply washed down the hillsides, taking the soil with it. When this happens over an area as extensive as the plateau, millions of tons of silt are swept down into the Yellow River, which gets its name from the color of the fine, loose soil. A local problem becomes a national problem. In the dry season, the light, unprotected soil is swept up in the winds, causing the dust storms that are blown over China's cities and beyond its borders. One thing that became apparent early on is the connection between damaged environments and human poverty. In many parts of the world, there's been a vicious cycle. Continuous use of the land has led to subsistence agriculture. And generation by generation, this has further degraded the soils. The goal was to give a hat to the hilltops, give a belt to the hills, as well as shoes at the base. The hats meant that the top of these hills had to be replanted with trees. Farmers were given financial compensation for not farming on them and keeping their livestock penned up. Resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land. The impact of such an enormous addition of vegetation goes far beyond the plateau itself. There's been a significant reduction in the soil rushing down into the Yellow River. The abundance and variety of new produce can be seen in the local markets.
Bill Mollison, our father of permaculture, warned in the 70s that deforestation over farming would create climate.
Are we at the crossroads now to make these decisions, or?
Oh, we have been for several years. I think it was critical 20 years ago, and I think now
Super critical.
This is in your Sonoma Desert, you guys, down there in Arizona. You got to go visit this for me. I would love to see this in person.
Like vast areas of America, this is part of the Great Dust Bowl of the 1930s, when most of the soil blew away. Between 1930 and 1935, Franklin Roosevelt had 3 million Americans out as supervisors and engineers repairing America. People of the country worked to repair the damage. They built hundreds of miles of earth banks which held up the runoff water long enough to settle out the silt behind them and for some water to soak into the ground. And this is called swailing. And these swales were made by horses and scoops and men. And today we have bulldozers, but we don't do this repair work on concrete. It's very rich in the swales, both the soils and the trees. I'll go down and have a closer look at that.
20 years later, Jeff Lawton made this amazing movie of it. The Sonoran Desert.
I'm in the flat bottomland here, kind of a penny plain in the Sonora Desert, and it's not much fertility around. Pretty sparse vegetation actually. And this here is an 80-year-old swale bank put in the Great Depression in the Roosevelt era. And it's a big one. And as I walk over the top, then you see this obvious event starts to happen. The trees get green and big, and the vegetation gets really lush. And this is something you need to really understand. It's not every day that you see a scene like this, an oasis of lush verdant green, created by nature, facilitated by good design. This is a very special scene. No maintenance, 80 years of fertility accumulated by water, designed to infiltrate into this arid landscape and create that scene. Outside, there's a hot, dry, dusty desert. In here, you couldn't believe you're in a desert. This is all green, lush and fertile, and beautifully shaded and cool.
Ethiopia, perhaps more than any other country, has come to symbolize the vulnerability of humankind to environmental catastrophe. As on the Luz Plateau, centuries of subsistence farming practices have stripped the land of natural vegetation. The dry gullies bear the scars of flash floods. Without vegetation cover on the hillsides, when the rains come, the water doesn't soak into the ground but flows away in a flood. Then it's not available for agriculture during the rest of the year. This leads to drought, and famously for Ethiopia, famine. But just as I've witnessed in China, there is hope that the situation here can be reversed. In just 6 years, Professor Legessa Nagash and local villagers have transformed a severely eroded terrain by planting indigenous trees and plants. Almost miraculously, a clear flowing stream has emerged where once there was a muddy trickle.
How is it that it's possible for you to get the stream to flow throughout the year? It is because of the vegetation cover, which has been regenerating on this mountain. This water is maintained in the landscape because as soon as rain falls on the canopy, on this vegetation, that rain then infiltrated gradually into the ground, ending up with this steady flow of this river.
I'm just going to show you this
In the
last
1950s,
one.
the indigenous land management system in the Arabian Peninsula, known as the Himma, was abolished. This system had preserved the fertility of Arabian landscapes for thousands of years. Jeff Lawton from the Permaculture Research Institute assisted in the site selection and some of the early design. A key characteristic of Albeda's geography are the mountains and the floods that flow out of them. All deserts flood, particularly mountainous deserts, and the floods in the Mecca region are dangerous. But we knew that floods were also the only sustainable source of water in the region. Thus, our objective was to slow down the floods in the mountains, enabling the water to sink into the ground once it hit the floodplain. Savanna-oriented agroecology for re-establishing sustainable grazing patterns while providing resilience through tree crops. Feedback gave us the knowledge to iterate, improving our designs and modifying our approach. In 2015 had planted over 4,000 trees, where fewer than 150 had been living before. We trialed 10 different species, each of which we thought would have both an economic and ecological impact. There was a real possibility that our whole system would die. During this time, the people of Albeda and the people on our team pleaded that we buy tankers of water to irrigate the trees and make sure that at least some survived. But I refused. I refused because I knew that if our system could not survive its own climate, then it was the wrong system. I refused because I knew that if our agroforestry survived Albeda, then it could be applied elsewhere in the region.
I'm gonna end it. I'm gonna end it right here with just what he says.
New acacia trees and multiple species of forbs and grasses have begun to grow anew. Nature is coming back. Our mineral and water cycles are healing. And an upward spiral of life compounding on life has replaced the downward spiral of desertification. This system can form the backbone of a new circular rural economy.
The reason I love this example, and there are so many others around the world, is because Neil Stackman is probably, I think, the greatest example of the biggest disaster and hardest conditions, least rain, unbelievable. He came here to visit us here at the school, and I couldn't believe the things he accomplished. And now he's helping put in marshes all over the world. There are so many great examples around the world. And what I'm hoping is we can take these huge examples of success and take us out of this Western drought by teaching the forestry people to work together. The Native Plant Association people that can grow these, like the Reclamation Nursery, and they're doing it with the Forestry Department. There's so many examples and so many people we could coordinate with, and then go to the politicians with a coordinated plan, state by state, of how we could mitigate this drought and bring back the vegetation and bring back the water. Because I think it's the only hope we have to get out of this terrible drought. So that was my presentation.
Thank you, Denise.
You're welcome.
Thank
you
you
guys
for sharing your operation there in Utah County and showing us some of the reasoning behind that. That was really good.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we will have a break until 3:30, and then we will be back here ready to go.
you.
There we go. Camera's off. Sure, now I'm holding up the rodeo here. Okay. Christopher Jones is an extension agent for agriculture and natural resources programs with University of Arizona Gila County Cooperative Extension. He conducts extension programming in forest health, watershed, and horticultural education. Mr. Jones earned a master's degree at University of Arizona in renewable natural resources studies and a bachelor's of science in forestry at Northern Arizona University. Chris's mission at the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension is to improve lives, families, communities, and the environment and economies through applied research and education in Arizona. Chris's presentation titled Community Heritage Apple Tree Orchard in the City of Payson, Arizona.
Thank you, Steve. I've just been having a great time today. Thank you so much to Jim and Andy and Jim and all the group that put this together. These presentations were great. My name is Chris Jones. I'm with the University of Arizona, as he just described. Cooperative Extension has these great mission statements. We try to fix everything in the world. And so last winter, I was like you guys. I gotta go to SWAAN, right? And so I'm thinking what I'm going to present on, because what type of agroforestry I'm doing. And so I came up with the idea. I'm involved with this heritage apple tree orchard in Payson, Arizona. As I'm learning here about permaculture from the experts, it's not really fitting all that, but you're going to help me out here because I got some time at the end for some audience input and ideas. So forwarding this. Ooh, there we go. Just a little bit about my presentation right now. I'm going to try to give the setting, show you where we are. I'm going to give you the story. We'll talk a little bit about grafting and techniques, something about the homestead properties and pictures that we're using, and a little bit of the maintenance vision of the project, and then some ideas and input from the audience. And so why a heritage apple tree orchard? And so the objective is trying to keep that history and the genetics of a rapidly dying heritage trees that were planted at pioneer homesteads, try to keep that alive by grafting their scions onto that rootstock. And so this has got a lot of history and neat stuff involved too. So a little bit about where we are. I think can I get this up? So this is Gila County in central Arizona. That little space there is called Roosevelt Lake. So they're feeding water to Phoenix here. I live down here in Globe, and on the other end of is Payson. So this is up in kind of the foothills. First place you start getting into ponderosa pine out of the Phoenix area. Very popular place to live. It's really quite beautiful. And down here in Globe, we're close to the San Carlos Indian Reservation, Fort Apache Indian Reservation over there. And you may hear about Resolution Copper and Oak Flat in the news. And so we've got that whole issue going on in our county, traditional Apache lands. And where we're putting in that mine is, if you drive out to Superior, there's this place called the Apache Leap. And it's beautiful cliff. You look at them, just great, these great big rocks. And back in the days of the wars with the Apache Indians, the cavalries, 12 or more of these braves who were fighting against the cavalry there, rather than sit and fight them, they jumped off the cliff there. We call it Apache Cliff, Apache Leap. And at the base there is a gypsum quarry that has lots of obsidian. And obsidian are these glass beads, they're about an inch in big or much larger. Hard to find those big ones anymore. We call them Apache tears. And so definitely a important place there. And that mining is really important where I live anyway. So this is Payson, Arizona, beautiful area there. This is what we call the Mogollon Rim. And that's where the Colorado Plateau begins. So we're all kind of connected that way. And like I said, people like to live up here because you get out of the heat of the valley, beautiful area. And part of what they do in Payson to have water is something they call the Green Valley Park. So this valley here, they call the Green Valley, was the original aquifer for the original community there. It was a logging community. They did a sawmill there and so on. And so when you see a nice lake like that in the middle of an arid place, you can imagine what's at the other end of it. And here's our the Northern Gila County Sanitation District. So this is where all the wastewater comes to. They clean that up and then they put it down into the lake, right? So notice these little aerators out here. And you can go trout fishing in there. On the other end of that, coming into town, and I just threw the story in here about this Wharf Coof, this WCOOF site. It's one of these super fund for polluted site. And so in the 1990s, they were looking for some more places they could put some more production wells in. And they found that they had PCE in 2 of these wells. And so back in the 90s, they had a dry cleaner. They were putting their material, their waste into the ground. And so this PCE was contaminating the water there. And so it became a Superfund site. And by 1995 and 96, they constructed the remediation of it. Get that out of the way. No. And the thing about PCEs is they're volatile. So what they did inside this building here is they have basically evaporative coolers, and they're able to put the water through that. It'll releases that PCE in the air and cleans up the water. They're able to put it back down into the aquifer. And by 1996, they had already started to clean that out. They stripped it out because the water was clean. And so currently those have been decommissioned, and that's all kind of over. But really close to that, and perhaps perhaps this is that building. I'm not too sure, but we've got some place we call the Payson Main Street Apple Orchard. And this kind of gives you an idea of what it looks like today. It's just got some small, the seedlings out here that we're grafting, kind of a large fenced in area. You need to have those fences to keep the elk out. And this is what we're working on. So this is what I'm going to share about. And one way that we've been able to share this story is through the local newspaper we call the Roundup, Payson Roundup. And my volunteers, I'll mention Michelle McDaniel, Rich Johnson, and our Gila County publicist, Paul Wolterbeek, were all involved with this article that we put together in the paper that tells the story. It's what I'm going to be talking about for the next few slides. But we asked people in the community to share their cuttings, that we're looking for their cuttings. And we just got excellent response from the community on this. I think people just kind of intuit what this is about and care about it. So that's good. So let's tell the story here. And excuse me, I'm going to read part of it. So one goal of community development is to give residents something they can be proud of. Payson's forward-thinking town council, along with then Mayor Craig Swartwood, had the opportunity to do exactly that a few years ago. On one quiet Saturday morning in February 2017, Swartwood was watching The Garden Guy on Channel 3. I don't know if you guys know who Dave Owens is, but he's a gardening expert, extreme gardening, TV personality, and author. That day, the topic was grafting old apple trees. A budding idea was born. The entire town could get behind this one, he thought. An orchard right in the middle of town. Not just any orchard. No, this would be an orchard filled with the apple trees that the pioneers of the area brought with them many years ago. Dave, the garden guy, has several Verde Glen trees, which he believed produced Ben Davis apples. His trees, which are between 60 and 100 years old, about 20 miles northeast of Payson, and he had fears of losing them due to a conflict over water rights. I would say these trees are not only historical in nature, but very rare indeed, and truly need to be saved, said Owens. I truly want to leave this lineage as legacy to future generations. It was a great match. Dave with the heritage trees and Craig with the vision became fast friends. Within 2 weeks, the Payson Town Council agreed to move forward on the project, and with the overwhelming support of the town and small businesses. But there were a few council members concerned with the cost of the project and making such a quick decision. The town chose to move forward anyway, knowing that if they tabled the project, the trees would not get planted that year. The town already had a perfect strip of property that the water department was no longer using. The wharf site, right? It's conveniently located close to the main street along the American Gulch behind the Sawmill Theater. Potentially the orchard would catch the eye of passersby and lure tourists to pick a few apples and visit the many small businesses on Main Street. The community support was overwhelming, with donations reaching $10,000 in just 24 hours and $15,000 within the first month. Swartwood said, "It shows you how the Rim Country people can get behind something, that they're excited to see something happen over there on Main Street." And so it began. Irrigation lines and fence posts were installed by mid-March of 2017, and a fence was erected to keep the elk out. The parks operation manager, Nelson Beck, managed the project alongside other town employees and numerous volunteers. Glenn McCombs, Plant Fair nursery owner, happily donated all the Malling apples rootstocks and those trees that were planted in early 2017. Dave Owens' goal was to graft the 62 trees the following year after they had time to establish a healthy root system. The rootstock variety determines the tree size, ripening time, disease resistance, and cold hardiness of a tree. A cutting from another tree, a scion, can then be grafted onto a rootstock and will determine the variety of the apple that will be produced. The plan was to wait until the following spring and harvest many scions from Dave's trees. However, the harvesting of the scions and grafting would have to wait until the last piece for the plan to fall in place. Volunteers to do the harvesting and grafting had not yet involved. Fast forward 3 years to February of 2020. So that, just want to put a little plug in for Glenn McCombs. In any community that has one of these nurserymen, he's been running this place since 1983. Just really involved in the community, helps out with a lot of things, and we've got a community garden, the Payson Community Garden. That's just got to be an envy of the world, because everybody goes there. 10% goes to the food bank, and just really something he supports, and just good man. So moving the story along here. So under the direction of Dave West, Dave Owens' neighbor, a small group of volunteers, including Glenn McCombs, Martin Fromknecht, and Dave Owens, took cuttings from several heritage apple trees. These trees were originally brought by train to Verde Glen, just north of Payson, from St. Louis by Mercedes Beluzzi in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The original land patent of 1894 gave 160 acres to McLaughlin and 160 acres to the Beluzzi family. Together, the two families cleared 25 acres for the trees and dug a half-mile ditch to bring irrigation water from the nearby East Verde River. These apples and other produce grown by the homesteaders were sold to the loggers nearby and used to feed their pigs, which were sold as well. And so just really neat history that we're able to share and preserve on that. And so it comes to the day that we were grafting those trees. So on March 3rd, 2020, McCombs, Frocknick, Beck, Sean Simmons, UA Gila County Extension Agent Chris Jones, and Master Gardener Rich Johnson assembled at the Payson Orchard. With tools in their hands and little experience to work from, Very true on that. Jones and Fraukeneck gave a quick tutorial on the cleft graft process, and off they went. The first rows of the trees were painstakingly, though enthusiastically, grafted from cuttings from one heritage apple tree from Owen's homestead. 2 weeks later, row 2 was grafted from another heritage apple tree, and over the next month, the team had grafted 3 more rows, 66 grafts on 30 trees. By the time the last grafts were made, several of the first grafts were noticeably taking or coming alive. The buds were swelling. At least some of the old trees were going to live on. By mid-May, the verdict was in. 63% of the grafts were alive and well, which meant that 5 different heritage trees would one day produce heritage apples in the Payson Heritage Apple Orchard. And so there I am and Rich, and we're just trying to learn how to do this. And that's Martin over here, who is one of our main farmers for the Payson Farmers Market. He comes from Norway, somewhere in Northern Europe, and just really has some really great practices he's using to grow his vegetables and trees. So a few things that happened here in our timeline. That the first time we did that was 2020. We collected scions from 5 trees at one homestead and grafted them on that eastern section. And we had 30 trees grafted. And then in 2021, when we put out the request to the community, where we could get apples from, 6 new homesteads were added and several of the failed grafts from 2020 were regrafted. So we had a total of 29 trees that day from that year. And then this year we're out there again. 1 homestead graft from 2021 failed, but was replaced from a heritage tree from the same homestead. And we regrafted some trees that failed from scions from the successful 2021 grafts. And today the Payson Apple Orchard has 59 trees, all grafted from a total of 12 homesteads in the northern Gila County area. And you can see, kind of nice generation here, people participating and just out there learning generationally. So again, you guys are the experts, but I'll just tell you a little bit about what is grafting. It's joining 2 or more parts of a plant to make one. And so you have your rootstock, which is selected for superior traits, either disease and pest resistance and adaptations to local soil conditions or drought tolerance. So you have certain ones that are going to do well in sandy soils, others that do well in clay soils, and where you get those from. And then you have your scion, which is the desired fruit or nut cultivar. These are harvested when we call late winter, as you're already into February, March, maybe up here at the higher elevations and latitudes here, and early springs while they're dormant. And you're particularly looking for the last year's growth. If it's that second year wood that already has the spurs on it, they're going to want to put out apples right away. So you want to make sure you're just using that last year's growth. And you can do grafting in the greenhouse, or you can do the top work in the field as we did. And one big benefit of that top work in the field is after the apple tree seedlings have had a chance to get established on the ground, they have a lot of energy. So when you graft onto that, you have a lot higher success rates because of that. Grafting timing is super important. We're looking to do apple trees and all of our temperate fruit trees here, kind of late winter, early spring. You're looking for that sweet spot where you're probably about 2 to 4 weeks before bud break, and who knows when that is anymore. And as far as scion storage goes, keep them hydrated and moist in a refrigerated place. You can put them into water. You can put them in bags with wet paper towels and just store them. And they'll store for quite a while until you're ready to use them, a couple weeks or more. And the important thing when you're grafting is to have that cane bean layer be in contact with the rootstock, that scion. And then you want to keep it, I don't want to close that. Keep it clean. Yeah, so I've just brought a few tools of the trade here. Let me see if I can hold this where, so I went outside and just got a sample of a sample inside of here. I want to do it on a time, really good, right? I've got plenty of time. You know, your cutting tools here. Your grafting knife, super sharp. So having a whetstone for that is important. The tape that we're using, you want to use this type of surgical tape or grafting tape. And what's nice about this is it's biodegradable and breathable. If you pull it a little bit, you'll see it kind of stretch here. Am I doing that in front of it? Yeah. And so you can get a real nice grip onto the branch where you're going to hold that together. And then you'll cover that up with another tape that you're going to cut after you notice that you had success with it. So these are different types of grafts. And one of the easiest ones to learn is what we call the cleft graft. And an ideal size is something about a pencil, because a pencil is something that's easy for you as an amateur to be able to cut into and do the work on. The bigger and thicker those plants get, the harder they are to do. And so you just take the scion that you got there. I'm going to get you guys in trouble with a little whittling. And you want to create a place where you can wedge that in. And so it already went outside, and let me make sure I got my glasses on here. Like holding this in the right place. There we go. Open that up. This will slip in there. And just make sure that you get those cambium layers match up. And again, when you have it like this, you match them up. You really only need one side to take. So if you've got two and both sides take, that's even better, right? And you'll wrap it tightly with this. Wrap it again with the other one. And quick little grafting tutorial, guys. You know, you never know what you get when you come out of it.
Kind of a rooting hormone or anything like that?
No.
You just did it green to green.
Yeah, green to green. And I think the trick is that timing. And so when the bark starts to slip and then you just kind of get that green start, the sap starts to flow, it's really ready to take. And apples are probably one of the species that are most forgiving and easiest for us to work with. So they're a great one to do. And we were getting in that third year, some of those stalks were kind of like this, where we were having to put some stalks in like that. And that's okay too. We were having some success that way. And so as I just discussed, here you go. We wrapped them up here. They aren't necessarily the same size, but having them fit the same size is kind of ideal for amateurs. And these you can see were successful. There's the green. And another important thing is this grafting wax. Can't hold in the right space there. When you put this together, this is going to be exposed where it'll dry out. It'll allow moisture to go through, as well as, well, you'll cover this up with some tape here, so you can cover that one pretty well. But we're in such a dry climate these days that it does help it to be more successful if you seal off that space. None of it's terribly expensive. Pretty nice thing to be able to do. So just a little bit about some of these places. Any questions on that before I move on? Yeah.
Chris, where do you get your rootstock from?
Well, the rootstock.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. Where's the rootstock came from? And our nurseryman, got it. He had these mauling apples. When I've done these, I've gotten my rootstock from Oregon. And the difficult thing with rootstock is it's hard to buy less than 100 at a time. So they want to sell you 100. They're not necessarily terribly expensive. Before everything started happening, you could get them for about $1, $1.50 a piece. Who knows nowadays, maybe they're $2.50. But dozens of different varieties for different types of soil conditions. And so you want to look for one that's going to be real good for whatever soil you're putting it in. So you've got sandy soils, you got clayish soils. Good question. Okay, so just interesting stuff here. The Hunt Ranch, I know Albert Hunt up in Pine, Arizona, one of the original settlers in the area. They put in their apple trees when they moved in. That was one of the places we were able to get our apples. They're happy to participate. So this Belusi McLaughlin homestead, 1894, up by Verde Glen. That was Dave Gowen's place. The Hunt homestead. The Piles, another early settler, historian by Jinx Pyle in the area, writes books. Bonita Creek, ranch areas, largely destroyed by the 1990 Dude Fire. So some of these trees were still there, apple trees, others burnt during that fire. Isidore Christopher is who Christopher Creek is named after, if you're from that area. So he was one of those early French trappers who came in for the beavers and kind of started up there. When I was trying to find some research on him, there is this great big log in front of a museum, and it's where he would prepare his hogs. Actually, drown your hogs before you sell them. And so that was his hog log. So that was kind of neat. This Boy Hot Ranch that was out by Bear Flat. If you ever hiked in the area, there's a place called Fred Hot. I'm pretty sure that's his brother. They went by Babe and Boy. I think Fred was Babe Hot, and the boy must be, I think it was his younger brother. David Gowan we got these from the Mazatzal Wilderness out by Deer Creek, but he was kind of the original homesteader at the Tunnel Natural Bridge. So you're out in that area, there's this big natural bridge. So the 1877, and they said he brought his cuttings from there. And then this Collins Ranch was previously owned by Zane Gray. We know who Zane Gray is also where we have a Girl Scout camp. And so they've invited us out there for some of their apples. I need to make sure that we picked up something they call the peace apple. And this apple grows out in the forest, but they had to show us to it. And it has a translucent skin. So that's just a novelty, pretty cool. So just a little bit about that history. The Bonita Creek store. This is David Owen's grave site. Notice, I don't know if you can see that, but that's a lot of red brome growing. And Zane Gray's cabin before it burned down. And we enjoy our grafting day. You can see it's kind of cool weather, but we just prune those down, encourage the ones we want to grow, and just amateurs are welcome. And so a little bit about what we're trying to do here, because we're going to take some maintenance and the vision of it. We need to interact with the City Council and Parks Department to assure the irrigation schedule. And I'm really happy I have this presentation made, because now we can go before the City Council and give them an update on the solar project and re-engage with them. Annual pruning to favor the scion growth. If you don't encourage just the scion that you grafted, it's going to grow from others that might die. Regraft is necessary. We need to create interpretive signs for each of the apple homestead sources, kind of tell that story. I think that's a huge part of it. And then eventually wanting to plan for public access and use of the orchard when the trees are fully grown, when people can get in there. So right now we've got it blocked off. And so, as I said, I have plenty of time to interact with you guys, some ideas and input from the audience. What type of opportunities would we have for agroforestry here, permaculture, things that we can bring in? And just thank you for your attention. Yeah, Andy.
Chris, do you know about the LEAF network?
I do know about the
And
LEAF network.
I'm curious if you used any of their resources or consulted with Raphael or Ann Audrey or
It was pretty much just me, but if they've got some ideas that we can work with, that'd be great. And thank you for making me think of them. Yeah. So LEAF network.
You know, they have it stands for Linking Edible Arizona Forests.
Right.
Jim, and they have quite a resource online. And I wondered whether other states like Utah have resources like that.
Related to that, because Andy mentioned Raphael from Dave Granada. She has two brothers who are like apple gurus. One of them is Master Vacancy. He had apple, heritage apples. Look at historic orchards, not just in Arizona, but in Utah and Colorado and Mexico. So some of you may be interested in that work. We brought a lot of those to where they live in Skull Valley. And now they're making cider from these heritage apples. But they're the gurus when it comes to grafting.
And this is Skull Valley.
Arizona.
Okay.
Just near Preston.
Out there by Preston. That's what I thought.
But that Cody, he lives and breathes apples, heritage apples, no less, and he's collected them from a wider footprint region. And so
I really appreciate that, Jim. I'll make sure I get that contact from you because we've got a trip planned to Prescott this summer. So I might try to make, if he's available. That'd be awesome.
I know it's hard, but you might repeat a little bit of that.
Oh, Jim was just mentioning to me that, Jim, you have to give me the name again.
Well, there's Raphael de Granada, and then her two brothers who are Roostons.
The-
Cody Rooston, I think, is the main one.
Bruceton,
Rooston, Rouston.
Rooston and Granada, de Granada.
Yeah.
And they have a apple orchard in the Prescott area, Skull Valley. And they've already got this all done. They're already making cider from their apples.
Yeah, they have a
So
company called Stoic Cider now.
Stoic Cider.
Apples. But it's all heritage apples that they've collected from the region, the wider region.
Well, that would be neat because they may have an idea of even the varieties of apples that they have. And at this point, we don't even know the
Yeah,
varieties.
they would love to come see what we're producing.
Oh, cool. That is really
I think
neat.
they would.
But, you know, as you saw, we've got a large fenced off area in the middle of town. All that's in there is apples. We could have a lot of space there for growing anything else. We got irrigation. So we could be fitting some other things in there. I was talking with John and I heard earlier people saying how hunting was important in their state. And I was thinking if NRCS would allow us to put elk as one of those crops that we could grow, you know, we could get some support for that. You know?
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
John Hines wanted to know how, what are some of the old apple varieties by name that you are preserving?
Yeah, that was just part of our discussion. And the only one that we may be aware of is Ben Davis. We need to find out what the names of those other apples may be.
Okay, yeah, I think the contacting Raphael de Granada is going to be really helpful to you.
Cool. Okay. Well, okay, yes.
I have a question. I don't know the answer to this, but in my research for agroforestry, or like on agroforestry, I've heard of like intercropping with different fruit trees, and certain like vegetables that you can intercrop, some to avoid and some that are a success. Does anybody here have any input maybe to help Chris out on what vegetables maybe you could plant that could help with like more of a community garden as part of the fruit orchard?
Right. So Wade just put out there that, we could be growing vegetables with our apple trees, and particularly now that they don't take up too much shade. I mean, they don't create much shade. What would be certain apples, certain varieties of vegetables we could grow with those crops and not be kind of those apples, not be difficult with them? Yeah.
You know that tintworms can be a problem for apples often and eating the apples, and so anything in the Apiaceae family, so umbels like carrots or Queen's lace or parsnips, anything in that family attracts a beneficial wasp that then lays its eggs, I believe, in caterpillars. So getting some like any plants from the Apiaceae family near those trees will help.
So anything we could grow that's in the celery family. So celery, carrots, kennel, I suppose. I don't know, that's not really
Yeah,
one,
that
but
was
that's probably a
great
good one.
Yeah.
Because they would attract wasps that would parasitize codling moth. Right, and we do have codling moth in the area. I'm well aware of that too, yeah. Okay, good ideas, yeah, so, and we do, yeah, go ahead.
Who's maintaining it now, or who's
The
like
city.
the city?
Yeah, so that's really nice, you know, the city's out there, they've been keeping the grass and the weeds under control. They haven't, none of the trees have weed eater disease yet, so that's a good thing too. Yeah, so yeah, it's a good relationship, but sometimes we wonder, we've had some successful grafts, but they don't make it through the summer. So we're thinking maybe they missed an irrigation cycle, right? Because it was like, that was growing, but then the end of June comes and they're no longer alive.
Yeah. And you said you're gonna go before city council and do a presentation?
Yeah, we'll share this with them and just kind of.
Just a comment. I don't think the town of Payson is a tree city, but obviously the community values trees, and something like this, you know, that what you raise $15,000 or, you know,
Yeah.
So obviously the community, you know, values trees, and so this might be a good opportunity to bring us in and say, hey.
A plug for Tree City USA.
Exactly.
Let's do it. Yeah. So John was just saying that when we talked with the town of Payson and such good support for that project, it brought in so much money. Maybe we'll be able to become a Tree City USA there. And we need to do that with Globe too.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. So I can hand back to you, Steve, unless you got some more stuff to hold me up here for me. Thank you.
All right. It's really interesting work here. So I guess this portion, our Q&A box, kind of, so we just wanted to take some time. By the time we hit this portion of the program, it's kind of overwhelming, right? I feel like you've just got knowledge poured into you all day. But of course, we want to be able to use this. So we just wanted to kind of facilitate a discussion, both in person and for our online attendees. Just talking, doing some reflection on this afternoon session and what we think are some agroforestry potentials in the Southwest. I'll try to figure out how to translate here.
If that microphone actually works.
Steve,
it gives me a weird loop.
Bev?
an idea is if, you know, people can come up to the mic and talk. And any of our virtual attendees, if you raise your hand, I can give you the floor to speak. So anybody who has something they want to add in. So if you want to pose the questions and people want to come up to the mic to share what they have to say, that might help us all be in the same room.
That's probably a good way to do it. I'm just going to open up our question and answer and chat box here too, so the folks in the room can see that. What do we think? Start calling on people.
Yeah, the first time I saw that, I couldn't help but think that we're starting to make some roads with like urban agriculture concept in the NRCS. And to me, that's starting to get people to think about their yards in a different way. You know, providing some things, and it's not new, it's not new. Because like visited my aunt who's 89 years old, and we went out and picked oranges and lemons in the yard and just picked flowers and like fresh peaches. So delicious. So-
Sorry to interrupt, but Deb was asking if people in the room could come up. Could Donna-
Oh, sorry.
Could you come up?
If you want to come up. If you don't, I can repeat. Okay, so Donna Davis, who's in the room with us, said that, you know, we're seeing an increase in this interest in urban agriculture. You know, we've talked quite a bit about permaculture, food forests, these sort of things, and how it's not really new, right? And I tend to think of multiple uses as tangible, right? I want to pick fruit, I want to sell something. But I think with a lot of what we see and some of the potential is not only education, but maybe making a mind switch. Yes, it's cool to replace grass with trees, but obviously for water conservation, all these issues. But for me, I see it as being able to connect, particularly in urban environments, as a way to connect people back with food, back with something natural. That's a really hard benefit to nail down on paper. And it's not new. Lyndon, when we were talking at lunch, said, you know, I realized today that my grandparents had a food forest. His family actually is from the area, and yeah, we had woodlands that we didn't have these monocultures way back in the day. We were integrating things because we had to, right? And are we going to be able to do that large scale everywhere? Like Rich said, sometimes it's just no, sometimes it's not the right answer. But I think in a lot of places it is. And I think if nothing else, so for those that have come from out of state to visit, Utah has been in a really truly a generational drought. We have not seen it this bad ever since we started recording. So thinking about resource issues, I think agroforestry is another tool, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is part of how we're reimagining green space, reimagining really developed living. So yeah, thanks for that comment.
So on that thought of urban agroforestry and kind of rethinking our green space, there's a program I wanted to tell you guys about. Have you guys heard of Homegrown National Park? So Doug Ptolemy, he's a professor, I believe, at University of Delaware. He just wrote this book called Bringing Nature Home, and then created this program, Homegrown National Park. And the idea is that, you know, we're wiping out wildlife habitat and, you know, the drill, all of it. And we think that we need to just create more national parks and have giant pieces of land to preserve the wildlife habitat. But if we start in our yards and spread the word to our neighbors and take over our neighborhoods, then we have a homegrown national park. And so you can go to the website and put yourself on the map, and then they're really promoting a lot of native plants in the yard. And you can go to nwf.org native plant finder, and it'll show you the top plants for your area, for your zip code, that host the most amount of caterpillars for butterflies and moths that then feed baby birds. So then you're attracting birds. And so it's just really about diversifying your whole neighborhood and your area. So highly recommend that, because I think with each and every one of our yards, we can really make a huge impact in greening our spaces. So.
a question about the potential sort of downside of urban agriculture, urban forestry. I'll ask it because I think some people here probably have good answers, because every once in a while I get asked, I think of food forests in urban areas as being an incredibly good way to increase the health of individuals and the climate. But every once in a while, somebody will say, well, aren't you also attracting mosquitoes, rattlesnakes, rats, things like that? And maybe some of you have experience with that and solutions for that. First of all, maybe you know if it's a problem at all. But if you've encountered it, how have you dealt with it? I'm just kind of curious if anybody has that kind of.
Rattlesnakes gotta live somewhere.
Beverly, could I answer that? Because I've had so much experience.
Yep.
Okay, here in my neighborhood, because I just heard a question to thank Jeff down in Moab, because I met Rosalind last year. We were working some ideas. She told me she was going to get gray water piping approved by the health department. She's very close to it. So I was very excited. I've brought mayors here. I brought my former mayor of Orem. I brought the Natural Resources Committee. I brought other people to come into this food forest. Not only are the temperatures lower, not only am I using less water, which they really applaud, but the most important thing is when you put nature back together, everything balances out. So as far as mosquitoes, I don't have any in here, but if I set foot outside, I get eaten alive. If I set foot out of my little Garden of Eden, if I come back in, I don't have those problems. We've noticed that the wasp and all the others that you must keep because they all balance out and they're all necessary in nature. We notice that you learn to get along in harmony and you don't get attacked by anything. Everything in an ecosystem, when allowed to just go back to normal, all the right players come and they all balance each other out. So we don't have diseases. We don't have worms in our fruit. We don't have infestations. We don't have any of those problems when you put these ecosystems back together and let nature do what it does best. It's amazing. We've created all these issues that you just brought up by our monoculture, our artificial planting. When we put nature back together, we don't have those problems because nature's perfectly designed.
Thanks, Denise.
You're welcome.
Do you have some more to add?
No.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, hold on.
Okay.
So, just
Thinking about some prioritizing natives, and so thinking about putting in choke cherries in your yard. So I'm thinking about just like my neighborhood specifically and things that we could add in. And if you put in a choke cherry, there's going to be no issue with too much fruit falling or because the birds are going to get there, so if you're planting something that the wildlife can benefit from, beneficial wildlife, then they kind of take care of issues for you also. So I think when you concentrate on natives, it really promotes the rest of biodiversity adding into it, if that makes sense.
but
Just gonna stay out of the way, let you guys.
Move that down a little bit. Too shorter than you. So I guess I'm kind of like the impromptu spokesman for Moab at the moment, right here, right now. I'm an AmeriCorps member in the city's sustainability department. And so we have a new landscape ordinance coming out, which has water budget and hydrozoning and whatnot. And we're trying to increase the amount of trees and whatnot in the city using green infrastructure and all that stuff. So I guess my question is, we're trying to increase trees and plants. How do you guys think we should go about maintaining it? And then also if we increase the amount of fruit trees, how do you guys think we should go about making sure that we pick all the fruit and not let it just drop down to the ground, I guess?
So you might want to check out in Salt Lake City, the Green Urban Lunchbox is an organization that has a gleaning program. So they recruit a community of volunteers. The homeowner of the tree gets a third of what they harvest. The gleaners get a third, and a third goes to our local food pantries. And they've worked out a system so that they don't overwhelm any one food pantry with like 40,000 pears in one day or really nice system. Fruit tree owners can get on a list to say, I want to be part of this. They do maintenance, a bunch of stuff. And I think it's been relatively successful. I mean, I'm sure there's always like a need for more volunteers. I don't think there's a need for more trees. Lots of them, but it does help with like relic orchards and, you know, old elderly people who might have a really nice fruit tree but can't maintain it. So you might want to consider some kind of an organization like that with the
Green urban
lunchbox.
Green urban lunchbox.
Yeah, and they do staff partially by AmeriCorps, partially by volunteer, and then paid staff as well.
Nice.
And one thing that we're struggling with in Salt Lake City, which I was kind of alluding to, is it's worth considering that you might still have a volunteer corps of tree maintenance folks in your city.
Yeah.
Because we have a real disparity, if you know anything about Salt Lake, between our west side and our east side, where a lot of the trees are planted in the older part of the city. We have lower income families on the west side. We have an extreme urban heat difference in temperature, but the maintenance is also really hard for working families who work 2 or 3 jobs, or you have, folks who have limited mobility or whatever. And so I feel like that's just one of those really key pieces to making trees more common, is also the lack of labor investment in taking care of them. So if you're starting that from scratch, it seems like also a way to plan that maintenance in some kind of tree core way.
Yeah.
That would still convince people that those trees are worth having, but maybe not always when they can maintain them themselves. And
Yes.
I know I should stand up there, but I don't.
Yeah, you probably should, because I want to do a bad job of repeating what you said. So we have the green urban lunchbox, which is a way to kind of get gleaning fruit trees,
Yeah.
getting, not overloading food pantries and stuff in the city. And then there's also just getting the community to help maintain existing trees and stuff. Yeah. And I think Tucson's a good example of that. Brad Lancaster's big into green infrastructure and whatnot, and this curb cuts. He was kind of the founding father of all that. I think, pretty sure he gets his community members to help maintain those as well.
Say that he's got a group, a really nice website called Dunbar Spring Neighborhood Foresters.
Dunbar Spring Neighborhood Foresters.
That's the poster over here. But yeah, it's a community-based group that maintains all the trees that they planted in that neighborhood. It works really well.
Nice.
Training, I went to one of their workshops with one of the professional arborists, talk about how to prune mesquite trees, and then they turn them loose and they prune a bunch of mesquite trees.
Nice.
They have those kind of activities that maintain all their trees.
I'm sorry, just to add one more thing. If you could convince your library to have a lending library of pruning tools, that's also sometimes a real pinch point, right? Like maybe you don't want to own a chainsaw or can't afford to own one, but if there's a well-maintained suite of tree tools, and libraries actually, your librarians would probably be into this. They lend sewing machines in some libraries. But the idea is then you're not limited by the ability to access those tools or have to store them in whatever.
Yeah.
But you're promoting that idea nonetheless.
So yeah, having a library, having a lending program, getting tools and whatnot, like for pruning through the library. Yeah, good idea.
Come on up. Please, we have 15 people online.
10,000.
They're only hearing half the conversation. So just get bold and come on up. Sorry.
The population of Moab is about 5,300. I think it's growing relatively, but then we also have like 2 million visitors a year. So it's not a consistent use of resources.
Does Moab have a Leah get in trouble?
Does Moab have a shade tree master plan or some urban forest management plan? Something like that?
I think Lydia could probably speak to this better, but we do have a tree stewardship ordinance.
Okay.
Is there anything else, Lydia?
No, yeah, you have like a whole tree inventory.
Oh, okay.
We have a whole inventory, like documenting all the trees we have around the city.
Because that's an important part of it, is knowing what you have.
Yeah.
You gotta stand up.
I'm coming. Okay, I have a question or maybe an idea, maybe for John Arona. Are there other urban foresters on participating today? You're in, John, you're an urban, you call yourself an urban forester?
I'm a district.
District, oh, you're district, okay, well, anyway, here's my, Tree City USA has been around a while.
Yeah.
Quite a while, right? You have to have like a tree ordinance. You have to have you have to have like a city forester.
So much money per capita.
So much
yeah,
per capita.
yeah.
So here's my idea is in terms of moving agroforestry forward, at least within cities, what about creating something like Tree City USA Plus or Tree City USA with food forest? I mean, is those of you, oh yeah, Donna, you know, is that an opportunity, or has Tree City USA discussed a way to encourage community forests, food forests within cities and towns? Come on up, whoever's going to reply, come on up.
Do you want to reply?
You can go first.
I would say to answer that
You gotta
question,
get in front of the camera.
to answer that question generally, they do have at least the tree health campus. So, but the tree health campus is really toward hospitals to put more greenery. That's the concept of looking out the window while you're sick and getting better, or if you're doing physical therapy outside, at least the green is helping you. And then there is the schools, which I always look at as an interesting plug, the tree campus K through 12. So if the kids choose a service learning project that has to do with that food type stuff, then maybe on a school campus, that could be of interest. But that has a life too, though, because if you have a kid that's a 9th grader that's interested, by the time they're 12th grade, then they may move on. So there has to be that connectivity, perhaps. Not specifically agroforestry, but urban and community forestry, I think there's more interest, but it still requires us to be this, keep bringing it out there, that when you plant a bur oak, perhaps that acorn used to be used for flour by Indigenous peoples because they would soak the tannins out. So it's kind of some of it is learning things, some of it is things that we've forgotten, but some of it as Western European settlers is something that we never knew. So there's some learning from that perspective, from the Indigenous learning, and then, you know, being able to utilize that in our urban landscape. But we do plant a lot of crab apples, many without fruit because of the messiness, but in this right spot, that could be a jelly. And pawpaws are becoming more interesting. I'm finding them in Colorado in different places. So it's just a matter of continuing to promote the other values that are coming from our urban forest, besides the street line trees. So I think there's potential. It's growing. And even Denver, for example, Denver Digs, you know, the Denver Urban Gardens, they're starting to put more permaculture into their land, their gardens. And they don't call it agroforestry necessarily, and it isn't always agroforestry. It's the fruit trees along the edges in rows with nothing underneath them. But I think that is growing. So that's our job, right? But not right now, not agroforestry.
Yeah. I think there could be more of an emphasis with Tree City USA. I know they do. They have like an enhancement, so a Tree City can do, you know, certain activities, and then they get like an enhancement award, it's growth award. That's what it is. Yeah. So maybe if they put more of a focus on, you know, a growth award towards agroforestry, or I'm just trying to think what else you could do there too. I mean, we just celebrated Arbor Day as well, and you know, maybe trying to plant the seed more with the youth would be having an agroforestry emphasis, and the little pictures that they grow. What does agroforestry mean to you? And they can do their pictures. So but yeah, no, I think there's definitely some potential there to expand that. So
Sorry, now that you got me wound up. Which I have to say that with this group, it's been receiving more than we ever give. It's just wonderful. Tenfold is coming back to go back and be charged, I hope. But yeah, I just wanted to share a good point. Like in Wyoming, the program, the Urban and Community Forestry Program Manager, she just sent out a bunch of grants to plant fruit trees at various locations with their urban and community forestry grants. One was at a college, the university, it's not a university, I think it's a community college in Cheyenne, and some others in Casper with the extension. So it's just a matter of growing, but there are little steps that are happening. So we just have to keep pushing agroforestry in all our landscapes.
Another plug for Moab. We're going on 30 years of Tree City. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a question for Steve and others locally here. We were talking about some of the dry farming down in Monticello and some of the windrow problems and trying to get trees to grow and what would work and so on. I was really inspired by Jeff Adams. Boy, those are things I could do at my house, and so now I am. What does grow here? I mean, it'd be so hard to get kind of our traditional trees, but would even a windrow made with greasewood be something worthwhile? Because you may have, it may grow easy enough. And then he was talking about all the beneficials that greasewood brought in. So I just wanted to have you share some ideas you've had for windbreaks or even fire breaks. We've been having some real issues with desert wildfires in Arizona. And one thing that's driving it is something we call red brome, which is sister cheatgrass. We've got a really different ecosystem down there. It's seasonal, comes in when we get the right rain patterns. So it could be another 10 years before it comes again, but it's so much drier. It seems like it's happening every year now. So I was thinking, and where they got cheatgrass, they're putting in fuel breaks with like intermediate wheatgrass. They're putting in dip grasses that they can use that's a little more sustainable, and then they can burn out the cheatgrass when they have a fire going. Maybe we could use prickly pear. Maybe we could do something like you say, just the principles of what grows, what can we use. And so, Steve, just wanted to see if your thoughts on when dealing with these winds.
So yeah, as far as what's going to grow, and it's Monticello. You don't have to get no fancy accents, just Monticello. Monticello is 1,500 feet higher than here.
7,000 feet, so it's
three.
close to 3,000.
Yeah,
It's
it's significantly higher. So it's really, it wants to be in that pinyon juniper community, is what most of that is. And so could you maybe some of the, I don't know if there are any, obviously Utah juniper, they're going to get something like this, and it's going to take a while to get them there. So maybe pinyon would be an option. I'm actually working with some folks at USU trying to do some improvement in pinyon. So in areas where they grow, particularly areas that are not able to be utilized for ag, the way we're doing it, using those as, okay, now we have trees that are producing more nuts. So thinking about those sort of things. But the hardest thing with windbreaks is you have to have the height, right? You have to have, I forget what the formula is. It's like 20, 10 more, right?
10 times the height. Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. And there with dryland farms, you don't even have the option of providing additional water. There's no water. So it's a good question, but maybe I don't know if something low, or even, you said greasewood, or maybe, something that's fire resistant like immigrant kochia. I don't know if something low growing in strips is enough to reduce that velocity across the ground. Are you saying this is a good idea, or yes, or?
So windbreaks, they can be built out of anything. I mean, they don't have to be super tall trees that are evergreen. They can be a structural fence. It's anything that stands up above the landscape is going to intercept or interrupt the flow of the wind. So you could have low growing, like the chokecherry you mentioned. They could, now, will they provide the same area of protection as something that's 30 feet tall, so 300 feet downwind, when they're only 8 to 10 feet tall? Well, it's 10 times that. So, and they also have to think about the relative height. So if you're just protecting soil when it's, say, exposed, the tilling farming process, then it's the height of that vegetation above the ground of the ground. If you're trying to protect a cow that's 4 foot tall, then you want to make sure that your windbreak is taller than the thing you're trying to protect, or if you're protecting a building or a structure. So having low growing shrubs that maybe produce fruit or some other harvestable thing like a woody decorative floral, and you're protecting, say you're growing vegetables, some of the root crops, well, they're only going to grow what, a foot to 18 inches. Great, you have now created a microclimate. So yeah, the height it's not the American way, bigger is badder and better. It is, what are you trying to protect and what will grow there? So hopefully that helps, that you can use just about anything. In fact, grass strips make a great windbreak if you have some tall, stiff stem native grasses, and they just have to be closer together than a 30-foot tall pine tree. I hope that makes a little sense.
And it can be successional, right? So that
Oh, yeah.
this plant paves the way for this plant to be able to grow, that paves the way for this plant to be able to grow.
Sure, and we can have a series of closer spaced grass strips, and then have some of those medium height trees or low shrubs. And as the woody component of the tree gets taller, you can start removing out grass strips and things like that. So, right, we can be a lot more creative than just the single species, single row for windbreaks. And we do a whole week-long training on windbreak design, so don't get me started.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Rich. And think back to Kat's presentation and the windbreak she showed us and how tall that was. And I think in a lot of cases, those kind of things were used routinely by like the Hopi and others. They don't have to be tall depending on what you need. And so greasewood, maybe it could be more widely used, or other kinds of shrubs of that height. Another species that I've seen that's a tall windbreak, if you're interested in evergreen windbreak, one species I've been kind of impressed with that's native to the Southwest, not this far north, but I think it would grow this far north, is Arizona cypress, which is a really hardy tree. I mean, that tree, I've seen it up in Flagstaff growing really well. I've seen it much lower, thousands of feet lower. I've seen it without irrigation. That is a tree, if you're looking for an evergreen that's pretty tall, that's hardy, doesn't need much support in terms of fertility or irrigation. that may be one species. And there has been a little bit of research, and it's actually a trial of it over in New Mexico at Las Lunas, the Plant Material Center there. And so that I would encourage you to think about that one, perhaps, at least into parts of southern Utah. It just seems like one that's pretty rough species. I mean, pretty tough.
So somebody asked in the chat if Arizona cypress is fire resistant. Sorry. Oh.
Yeah, I don't really know the answer. I doubt it's particularly fire resistant, but I just don't know.
Okay. Excellent. The answer's no. So yeah, there are definitely in areas where we have some watering capacity, then there's that opens up more chances for us. But I mean, probably any perennials can help.
I like that idea of hackberry too. If you're looking for deciduous, a hardy deciduous windbreak, the native hackberries probably could be good.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say this. One more thing on windbreaks. Think about what time of year does the wind cause a problem? And because if it's just during the growing season, deciduous trees are just fine. They'll provide a fair amount of density. If it is more in the winter time, because you have whatever you're trying to protect, then you probably want to look at a conifer. So think about which and winds change seasonally, correct? So think about which way is the wind coming from at the time when it's the most problematic for the issue you're trying to address. And that will go a long ways in helping to select species and height and things like that as well. And
that's a good point. And if Will was here, he'd probably agree that the wind usually starts blowing about this time of year in Monticello. It usually stops about early May. So that's all. We got a little bit of time.
Yeah, this isn't really a question, but just to kind of put another comment out there that maybe the difference, I've read some information about using the word perhaps indigenous to your location over native, because I live in Colorado and everybody wants to plant an aspen in Denver. And, so that you got to consider that maybe even cottonwood is native, but it's in the river bottoms. And so when you put your modular up on the high prairie or in the high desert, it's not going to have the same ability to survive in that tight clay, windy location relative to where it's indigenous to. So perhaps just looking around, and I think some of the biggest lecture, all of it has been overwhelming today, but harvesting your water, where is the water? What did, it was Kat that said that one. Plant your water first. And I have seen some demonstrations with Jerome Lawson-Towski's stuff where you're just watching where the water, I know we've all had water downpours and none of it's soaked, but look where those rills are, because that's telling you where it went flat again. And then those are some spots. And then of course, you've all seen plants that have grown where there's a pile of pallets or something, or rocks, or just whatever's there. And then maybe the birds just like to sit there, and then there it is. So it's just interesting to look and see how nature's putting stuff for us naturally. Or once you get your trees planted that you did have to water, I can't tell you how many hackberries and catalpas and plums I have growing in my yard all by themselves, because of the microclimate that you've had to water to create, but now it's there. So I'm not sure if that's going to answer the whole windbreak question, but at least like it's already been hinted upon in some of the lectures, it just comes once you kind of start creating your space. But thanks. Sorry.
All right, so we have a 15-minute break, and then here, well, they were supposed to have some, yeah, something for us here. So I've got to check on that. We have our poster session, so you could spend a good half hour per each poster and you'd be set. But yeah, so we'll have a break, come back. As we come back, if even after the break, if I can give everyone some brief instructions for our field tour tomorrow, have a chance to do that, or even after we log off here, that would be great. We should do it now.
Could I
Okay.
do one? Could I make one?
Please, Andy.
Quick announcement. Steve mentioned this in the beginning, but maybe not all of you know, SWAAN does quarterly webinars. And I maintain a mailing list, and there's a lot of new people here that are not on the SWAAN mailing list. You know, I'm not going to sell your email to somebody. It's all free. But if you want to, I'll probably put you on that list unless you tell me not to. If you don't want to be on it, just come up and tell me. I'll believe it. But anyway, I think you might all benefit from these webinars that we do. And some of you out there, we may ask you to do a program for us. So yeah, I know there's some great opportunities. And so anyway, I just wanted to say that just to make a pitch for SWAAN's quarterly webinars.
Awesome. Anything else, Bev?
No, just make sure that if you're here for CEUs, that you sign those CEU sheets that Andy's got in the back. And for anybody online, if you haven't already given me your certification ID number, I will need it.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
All right, well, enjoy your poster contest program.
I don't know if I